Hey everyone, thanks so much for stopping by. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Chimera Luffy by Mellra. A single bite changes everything when Luffy eats the legendary Chimera fruit. Gaining the power to copy every Zoan and unleash a true mythical form, Luffy tears through destiny itself. Canon bends, legends fall, and the seas are forever altered as a monster with a smile begins his journey. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Chimera Luffy by Mellra. Respect to author.
Chapter 16. They were all on the Mary's deck once again, the ship still bearing the fresh scars of the battle with the Marines, and Zoro was leaning over the side of the ship to look behind him. "Looks like the Marines have stopped following us," he called, before he heard several loud groans behind them, as if the fact that they were now out of danger was a bad thing. "That's good news. We shook them off," he added as he glared at them, but the rest of the crew only groaned a little louder before the swordsman spotted them. All other 5 members of the crew were all lying down on the upper deck with their heads through the railing, looking close to tears with big, sad puppy dog eyes looking behind them. "Stop it," Zoro snapped at them. "What's with the pathetic groans? I miss her." They all cried out together, and it didn't take long at all for him to know who they were talking about. Irritated, Zoro started telling them to stop whining. "If you wanted her to join that bad, then you shouldn't have let her leave," he told them, and that got them all gasping. You savage," Chopper gasped, as if he couldn't believe he heard Zoro say something like that. "Blockhead," Nami agreed as Sanji then added, "Idiot." Luffy tried his hand at insulting him, but it sounded pathetic, and Usopp began telling him off for that as Zoro turned away from them, as if he couldn't believe he was dealing with this. "We didn't, did we?" Zoro demanded, already sick of this whole thing. "Now shut up about it." The group ignored that and continued with their pouting. Suddenly, Luffy caught a whiff of something, or someone, he'd smelled before, but for the life of him couldn't place the scent as it was all muddled thanks to the craziness that occurred on deck just recently. Just then the galley door opened up and a familiar voice cooed from inside, "Looks like we finally escaped the firing squad." Zoro barely registered the voice until Robin stepped out and said, "Excellent work." She looked greatly different than the Robin they had seen up to that point. She was dressed much more casual and modestly than she had before. A simple light purple shirt with darker pants. She smiled confidently at them as Zoro looked and finally realized who he was talking to. As soon as they saw her, the other 5 above them got up so fast that they banged their heads on the railing above them. Zoro's hand went directly to his sword as he yelled out, "Here to avenge your friends. Just try it. It's an enemy attack." Usopp screamed out fearfully. "What are you doing here?" Nami demanded as she held onto the swollen bump on her head before she took her new weapon out, ready to protect herself. It was really quite funny to watch them all freak out at the sight of Robin, who just stood there and watched. Usopp was yelling fearfully over a speaker as Chopper ran around in a panic. It was very tense as they finally calmed down enough to have her surrounded on all sides, looking ready to fight her if she so much as moved wrong. Chopper was asking who she was. "I don't know," Sanji gasped happily, his eyes turning into little hearts like how it had been when he first met Nami. "But she's so beautiful." Robin, meanwhile, was walking past them all without even giving them a glance of concern. She went over to a lawn chair that was underneath the stairs before she disarmed Nami and Zoro, surprising them both. "Didn't I tell you before?" she asked nonchalantly. "Don't point such dangerous objects at me. Are you always so slow?" Zoro was looking annoyed. That stupid ability of hers made her deadly to swordsmen. He looked ready to fight her barehanded when Nami demanded to know how long she had been on the ship. "Quite a while," she answered as she picked up the lawn chair and added, "These clothes are yours, right? I'm borrowing them." "Just a minute, lady. Who the heck do you think you are?" Nami screamed at her, outraged that a member of Baroque Works was in her clothes. But Robin was looking directly at Luffy, her attention solely on him. "Monkey D. Luffy," she said calmly, "it hasn't been so long that you've forgotten what you did to me, has it?" Sanji grabbed Luffy by his front and started shaking him in anger, demanding to know what he did to her. "Wait a minute, stop lying." Luffy then called to Robin as she walked by him and set the chair up. "You know I didn't do anything to you." "Wrong," she answered back firmly, with that same smile on her face, as she sat down and started to make herself comfortable. "And what you did to me was unbearable," she added as she leaned back. "Go ahead, admit it." Sanji was shaking Luffy harder than ever as Usopp was telling Robin to leave from behind the mast, and they could hear Chopper asking what it was she was talking about from just above them, out of harm's way. "You're not making any sense," Luffy said, now looking really annoyed at everything that was going on. "What do you want me to do?" With a smile, she leaned forward in her seat, as if they were discussing business. "I want to join you." For a brief moment there was nothing but silence around them, except for the sound of the flag flapping in the wind above them. Each one of the Straw Hats stared at her as if she had suddenly confessed to a murder. WWWHHHAAATTT. Almost everyone yelled, staring at her with a mixture of different expressions. Some angry, some shocked, some fear, and, in Sanji's case, bliss. She only smiled, turning back to Luffy as she explained, I wanted nothing more than to die at that very moment, but you forced me to live. That's your crime. Sanji looked startled at that as she rested her chin on her hand, still looking directly at Luffy as she finished, there's no place for me to go or to return to. So I decided that I'll join you. Luffy's face held no expression as he thought it over for a moment. I see your problem, guess there's no other choice, he finally said calmly. Welcome. Hey, he called just as the Straw Hats all yelled at their captain furiously. But he just looked back at them with a smile and added, there's nothing to worry about, he said firmly. Trust me, she isn't a bad person. Everyone was staring at him, sure that he lost his mind, but Sanji was looking overjoyed at Luffy's decision and was cheering it on in the background even after the others calmed down. Later in the crow's nest with Zoro who was training as usual, Luffy's hand suddenly appeared and he rocketed himself up to him. Hey, Zoro, he said happily. Sanji told me to tell you dinner'll be ready in 5 minutes. He said he's going to try making some of the yummy food they had at the palace. It's gonna be so good. Zoro didn't respond at once as he kept lifting weights silently for a moment, staring out at the sky that was an assortment of different shades of reds, oranges, and pinks. And then, without even looking at him, he asked, why did you do it? Luffy looked confused. Why did I tell you? Well, it's dinner and we need food. Not that you idiot, Zoro said in annoyance, finally looking at him, his back to the fading sun. I mean, why did you let that woman join us? What do you mean? Luffy asked him in confusion. Did you forget already that woman used to be part of Baroque Works? He snapped at Luffy in frustration. We don't owe her anything. You saved her life and suddenly you owe her a favor. How do we know that we can really trust her? Zoro finished asking him seriously. After her part in helping to tear Alabasta apart. You really want someone like that in the crew. But what reason does she have to attack us now? Luffy asked him calmly. It's like with Bon Clay, she only wanted to leave Alabasta, right? There wasn't any reason for her to want to stick around there anymore. Maybe, Zoro said, but what makes you think that we can let her stay and not worry about her betraying us later? I dunno, he answered and Zoro looked ready to hit him over the head with the weight in his hands at the answer. We need more than that. Zoro yelled. I don't know, Luffy repeated, his eyes looking out into the distance. But something just tells me that we can trust her, Zoro. I mean, we've all done a lot of bad things in the past, right? Besides, I don't think she ever really liked Crocodile, Luffy said and Zoro looked to him in surprise. She was his partner, he reminded her. And he tried to kill her, Luffy spoke up, looking back at him, and she saved me before. Zoro looked even more startled by this as Luffy explained about how it was Robin who gave him the antidote to the scorpion poison, and had even been the one who helped him out after Crocodile left him at Rainbase. And when I finally caught up to them in that tomb, Crocodile stabbed her with his hook, Luffy finished explaining to him. After she gave Vivi's dad the antidote for me, I could hear what they were saying. Crocodile was looking for something. Looking for something? Zoro asked, what was it? And it was clear from the look on Luffy's face, that he didn't get the fact that it was some kind of weapon that could cause mass destruction that Crocodile was looking for. Only the fact that it was something dangerous that slimy creep wanted for himself. I don't know, but it was something bad, he answered him, and I overheard Robin say that she decided from the start not to hand it over to him. He was quiet for a moment before he added, I don't know, but she doesn't seem like a bad person to me. He looked to him and finished, she sounded more sad than bad to me. Zoro just looked at him before he sighed. Fine, he told him. I guess we have no choice anyway. But I'll be keeping a close eye on her just so you know. She does anything that seems like a betrayal, I'll be the one to throw her off. Over time, the whole crew warmed up to her as she got to know them. Every morning Robin was able to wake up to bright faces and good food that Sanji worked so hard for them. Luffy was always the first to wish her a good morning and Nami was more than happy to talk to her and get some relief from the boys. Usopp and Chopper had also gotten used to her and didn't seem as nervous to be around her. Even Zoro's cold eyes slowly seemed to warm up and he seemed to be willing to take a nap even when she was around them. It was a bright sunny day nearly a week later and the crew was all on deck doing random tasks. Zoro, who was lifting weights in the background, looked up and asked if that was rain. They all looked up to see that it was dust and bits of wood that were falling on them. No way, Sanji said, holding his arms out to try and catch it, this ain't rain. He looked up and they all did the same thing in time to see something falling through the clouds just above them. That's interesting, it looks like oh. His eyes widened and his voice died in his throat as they all realized what it was. It was a worn-out, rickety old ship falling from the sky. The Straw Hats were all so stunned that it was as if time had frozen for a second. But that soon faded as they all began to scream out in fear as it hung right above their heads. It ended up missing the Mary, though narrowly, and the ship hit the ocean with such a large crash that it turned the waves around them as fierce as any Grand Line storm. Unlike with Nami giving them a slight heads up before the weather turned unforgiving, this came without any warning and all they could do was cling onto the Mary desperately as bits of the ship counted to fall from the sky like hail. It soon turned into insanity as they all struggled to stay upright, the waves pitching the Mary around like a piece of driftwood. They could hear Zoro's voice screaming somewhere to hold on tight and not to let go no matter what. The Straw Hats, Usopp and Chopper especially, screamed and seemed ready to have a nervous breakdown. Why are their ships falling out of the sky? Nami screamed as she hung onto the mast as more bits of wood fell around them, the waves rising up above them like some kind of beast trying to swallow them. I know, Usopp cried out, his eyes wide and a mad smile on his face. This is just an awful dream. Great, I love dreams, Chopper called out, truly believing Usopp for a moment before their heads crashed together, thus ending that theory. Hang on, I don't think the party's over yet. Sanji called over their cries of pain, and when they looked up it was as if they were stuck on a merry-go-round, everything was spinning. It won't stop falling. The rudder, turn the rudder, Nami screamed and Zoro called that they would only flip over in these waves. Sanji yelled to Luffy to help protect the ship, to which the captain asked how. Luffy then noticed how Usopp seemed to have calmed down suddenly. He was sitting in a meditative state, his eyes closed with a calm smile. I cast aside my worries and reached deep within to find my happy place, Usopp declared firmly. And when I open my eyes, this serene landscape is all that will lay before me. He picked the wrong moment to open his eyes. He screamed at the top of his lungs when his new friend fell out right in front of him, a skeleton dead guy. Don't throw that nasty thing at me, you idiot, Nami screamed as he threw the pile of bones off him and near her. They're falling everywhere, Sanji yelled out, another skeleton falling near his feet. I'm surrounded by dead, Usopp cried out, sounding close to losing his mind as he curled up in a fetal position. When is this stuff gonna stop falling? Nami screamed out. They could only continue to hold on and hope for the best. Soon, however, after several more chaos-filled minutes, the sky was clear again, the falling debris had finally stopped, and the Mary was surrounded on all sides by the broken ship that had reminded them of the destroyed galleon back at the Bharati. But they hardly noticed it as they stared up at the sky, as if expecting another ship to fall. After doing a quick head count to see that everyone was all right, at least most of them, since Usopp and Chopper were now in a corner, hugging the other like how a child would to a teddy bear, Luffy cried out, all right, why did a ship just fall out of the sky? I knew coming to the Grand Line was a mistake, it freaks me out. Usopp cried out, still hugging Chopper, his eyes twitching so much that it looked as if he was having a seizure. First we travel over a ship graveyard and now they're falling out of the sky, complete with skeletons. Nami gasped in horror. She was staring at the log pose, telling them that she was sure that it was broken because it was now pointing to the sky. Robin stepped forward, the only one who hadn't screamed in all that madness. She had returned to her usual calmness. It's not broken, she answered, as if things fell from the sky all the time on them. The log pose registers an island with a strong magnetic pull and the needle is reflecting that. If the needle's pointing to the sky, they all looked to her as she focused her attention skyward, then, it must be pointing to Sky Island. Sky Island, they all repeated loudly, none of them having ever heard of such a thing. They all talked about it, with Zoro ending the talk as pointing out that there wasn't anything but sky right over their heads. That's not actually how it works, Robin answered, it's not an island above us but an entire ocean. Usopp, Luffy and Chopper all had their eyes wide and bright at the thought of going to an island floating in the air. They were all cheering and going on about wanting to go to such a place, but Robin used her powers to cover Luffy's mouth and Sanji reminded them they couldn't fly. Soon though, Robin and Nami were arguing about it, with Nami telling her that there was no such thing as a flying island and insisted that their log pose was broken. That was all. Not quite, Miss Navigator, Robin countered coolly as she pointed to the log pose, you're trying to fix something that's not even broken. We should be trying to find a way to get to Sky Island. You really need to learn to trust your instruments. No matter how crazy things get, or how weird the situation is we find ourselves in, never doubt the log pose. Out here, on the water, this is one of the most steadfast and unbreakable rules, Robin continued. What we should be doubting, is the common sense we all that tells us that an island cannot exist in the sky, on an ocean nothing. That needle is pointing towards an island, I bet my life on it. Then Robin began looking through the remains of a skeleton they had found. As they looked through it, Luffy and Usopp went jumping over to the bigger parts of the ship to explore it. Luffy didn't pay any attention to the slowly sinking boat as he walked inside, the old ship cracked and creaked under his weight as he went looking through all the rubble. Luffy, who was looking over some of the papers they found among a desk that was broken right in half. Back with the crew, Robin told them about how just looking at a skull and some books, they discovered that the ship's name was the Saint Briss, which left the kingdom of Breeze in the South Blue about 208 years ago, as well as being able to tell how old the man was when he died. Suddenly, Luffy gasped. They looked up in time to see that he was staring in wonder at one of the rolls of paper in his hands and his eyes were bright. But soon the ship had filled up with water and Luffy was forced to run out of there, having Usopp haul him back to the Mary. "You won't believe it. I did it." He held up the roll of paper he found. "I found the most incredible thing." When they saw what it was, they gasped at what it was he had. A map of the Sky Island. They all cried out. Nami almost ripped it out of his hands and stared at it. "It's called Skypia," she asked, more to herself than to Luffy who was nodding firmly by her side. "Then it's true. There really is an island up there." It was great to see everyone looking excited at the thought, even as the last bits of the ship slowly sank beneath the waves. As the Goofy trio cheered, doing a dance with their arms linked, Nami pointed out that they didn't know how to get there or if it was even possible, and that there was always a chance that the map was a fake. The looks on their faces was as if she had just told a bunch of little kids that Santa Claus didn't exist. She saw the hope fading from their faces and quickly tried to reassure them that she was sure it was real. But then she punched the mast angrily and yelled out that if it existed or not wasn't the point, the fact was they didn't know how to get there. Luffy was refusing to listen and began yelling that he wanted to go there no matter what, and the fight only ended when she hit him over the head. "This isn't about me. It's about reality." She yelled at them angrily, "and the reality is that we know next to nothing. What we do know is that we can't defy gravity and sail upwards. That's impossible. What we need is more information. If a big ship like that made it up there, then odds are we can do the same thing. We just have to find all the records left on that ship." Usopp reminded them that the ship was most likely at the bottom of the ocean by now. Nami cried out confidently, "If it's sunk, then we'll salvage it." And with a little more thought, Usopp came up with the plan. He quickly built a diving system made up of barrels and long air hoses. And in the end, the monster trio had all volunteered to go down and find what was left of the ship. Luffy, however, decided to just swim, naturally, turning into a blacktip reef shark before following the other two over the railing. The three jumping headfirst into the water. As the three of them went down to salvage what they could of the ship for more information, they come across a group of pirates led by a man who looked like an ape, named Masira, who claimed that he had control over the territory and all ships that sink there belonged to him. Masira and his crew begin salvage operation and are in the process of raising the ship when they run into a snag. The monster trio were still inside the wreck and beat up his crew. Masira went down to handle things and confronts them when a giant sea turtle appeared out of nowhere and swallowed the ship they were in, like how a fish would to bait on a hook. This didn't last long, however, as the overpowered trio were able to upset the turtle's stomach enough with their constant thrashing that all the humans were spat out. Soon after they headed towards the surface and they were back on the Mary, however now it was pitch dark out. There was another large ship there with them. One that was at least twice as large as the Mary and had rows of palm trees going along the sides of his ship and two banana-shaped poles. Also on the sails was another pirate flag, a monkey's head with two bananas in place of the crossbones. Luffy was coming to from where he lay on the deck, dripping wet and slowly getting back to his feet, dropping the large sack that was on his back. "Hey," he called to them all, when night happened. Zoro was pulling on a rope, telling them that they were getting out of here now. Suddenly, there was a cry of anger and they looked in time to see someone jump out of the sea and landed on the side of the ship, screaming back that they hand back the treasure they took. It was Masira, and he truly looked like an ape, more primate than human. He was also in a bright orange-yellow jumpsuit with headphones and goggles, much like the ones that Usopp had, but what made him really interesting was the fact that he looked like he had a tail. However, his face was full of anger as he glared at them all, threatening to tear their ship apart if they didn't hand the treasure over. Everyone got up, ready to fight Masira off. But then, Masira's crew were all looking ready to cry as they pointed wildly behind them, too frozen to speak about what it was. When they all looked, they all felt close to choking, feeling close to fainting at what they saw. Giants, at least 5 of them, so large that blocked out the sun. Black as night, they towered over them as great as the sky, even the giant island turtle was tiny compared to them all. They carried spears and had wings on their backs, like angels of death, looking down at them as if they were prey to them, though there were no eyes. Everyone was frozen in fear, even Robin was turning a shade of blue they had never seen from her before. As the middle one raised his spear above their heads, they all came back to life and screamed out, "SSCA MMMMMMOOOOOONNNNNNSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSSssssss. The straw hats were all in overdrive. Together they broke out the paddles and be could go to get away from these things. It was as if they suddenly had a motor on their back and were going as fast as ever before. Fear was the only thing that kept them going, and they didn't stop until they had reached the end of the dark sky and were safe in the bright sunlight. Once the danger had passed, they all huddled on the deck, shaking and trying to catch their breath. Suddenly, Zoro spoke up what they were all thinking. That couldn't have been real. They all began to list what happened in the last few hours alone. First there was that huge galleon that fell from the clouds on top of us, Zoro started off. The log pose's needle started pointing to the sky. Nami added, hugging her knees as she glanced at the needle. A psycho makeup-wearing monkey shows up and blocks our way, Usopp added, slowly calming down to a normal breath rate. Chopper then added, and then a gigantic sea turtle eats our salvage ship. Then darkness fell, Robin sighed, almost grimly. Because the biggest monsters I've ever seen in my life blocked out the sun. Luffy finished for them all. The crew noticed that they still had Masira still on deck with them and kicked him off. Then the monster trio, unloading the sacks of stuff they got from the ship before it was eaten. There wasn't anything that told them about Sky Island, and not even a scrap of treasure like Nami had thought there would be. Needless to say, Nami wasn't the least bit happy. She began to yell at them about this as they tried to tell her that his was all they found down there. That they'd picked it clean by the time that Masira appeared. But she only got angrier as she began to break it all, even crushing the suit of armor that Luffy was walking around in. It wasn't a good thing. She looked ready to start foaming at the mouth with rage until Robin was able to pacify her by showing her the map in eternal pose to a place called Jaya that she took from Masira's ship, and they soon decided to go there, in hopes of finding someone who could help them. Soon they were sailing into a harbor. At first glance, it looked like some kind of resort, full of beautiful buildings with red pointed roofs and palm trees. Except for the numerous pirate ships docked at said harbor. Usopp had noticed the ships as well and pointed it out to them, with Nami slapping him playfully that since when can pirates dock their ship without being run out of town. Just as he was starting to calm down, they could hear someone from one of the buildings screaming that he was about to be killed, and the weakling trio all looked ready to cry in fear. Nami had decided to go with the boys, and as they walked on, they could hear the sounds of fights and arguments going on everywhere they passed. They couldn't go a few feet without something breaking or hearing death threats, and Nami was giving the boys an earful, making them promise that they wouldn't fight back no matter what. If they got into trouble, they'd be forced to leave and then they'd never be able to find information on Sky Island. They barely acknowledged what she was saying just as a crippled old man fell off his horse right in front of them. Croaking for help, he asked if they could help him back up onto his horse. He was a very large man, with a slightly longer than normal nose, straight purple tattoos coming from his hairline to the corners of his eyes, and was wearing a thick, black fur coat. After Luffy and Zoro helped him back on his horse, he offered them some apples as a thank you. "Do you take us for idiots?" Zoro demanded, noticing the sneaky look on his face. "We'd never trust food from someone like you." But Luffy did take one and took a bite, and as soon as he did, there was an explosion behind them. They then heard some shouting, some men yelling that apparently some men took some apples from that same old man, and when they ate them, the apples blew up. Zoro and Nami had turned almost as blue in the face as they had been when they saw the giants as they realized what was going on. Nami screamed at Luffy to spit it out, practically strangling him in the process as Zoro had his sword in his hands, looking ready to attack the man, demanding to know what he had done. The old man smirked. "No worries," he said with a hiccup, "the boy isn't hurt. If he had eaten a bad one, you would have died on the first bite. You're lucky." The two dragged Luffy away before he could do anything else that might kill him. Nami was hissing about it to Luffy, who didn't seem bothered by his close escape from death. But then they heard the sounds of insane laughter from one of the roofs right behind him, and when they looked, there was a large man standing there as if he had just been declared the next king. He was a big, muscular man with curly, light violet hair reaching past his shoulders and with a mask covering his upper face. The others heard some of the citizens talking about how he wanted to be the fighting champion, which got Zoro's and Luffy's attention as they looked back, ready for a fight. "Don't even think about it, you two," Nami screamed before she dragged them on. Later, they were all suddenly in a worn-down looking bar. Nami and the boys were at the bar enjoying some drinks and food as they talked about what it was they were supposed to do. Nami slapped her glass down on the bark in front of her. "Man, that really ticks me off," she said bitterly as the other two let her complain, Zoro downing his drink and Luffy waited impatiently for his food. She began with a long talk with the bartender about this island, and he gave her the same kind of advice that Robin had stated only a little earlier. He set 2 cherry pies on the bar for Luffy and a large man next to him before he told her that the log pose would reset in only a couple more days, but it might be wiser to skip town sooner than that. Nami had started to ask the bartender something when both Luffy and the man next to him slammed their fists down onto the bark, each with their own opinion about the pies. Soon he and Luffy had gotten into a fight about the pies being served to them. Noticing that their remarks opposed with each other, they decided not to mind the other at first and drink some soda. But at that, they both made opposing remarks about that, really getting on each other's nerves this time, and they decided to have some food for takeout. Luffy ordered pieces of meat and the man started ordering pies. However, upon learning the number of food that the other was ordering, they started competing about who can order more. The two were now glaring at each other, looking ready to fight. "Do you two even have the slightest idea to what you're fighting about?" Zoro screamed, as Nami shouted that he promised her not to start a fight. And that they didn't have that kind of money anyway, they weren't here to shop. Luffy didn't look happy at all, glaring at the man as if daring him to say something wrong. The man suddenly grinned evilly at Luffy. "So then, are you a pirate?" he asked. "Yeah, that's right," Luffy answered, and then Blackbeard asked how high his bounty was. 30 million, Luffy answered. The man however seemed to think that Luffy was making it up, and even telling him that he wouldn't believe it even if he collected it. "Are you calling me a liar, you fat, hairy ape?" Luffy yelled angrily. Finally, Zoro was yelling at them both to break it up, as the bartender sent down a package of cherry pies on the bar in front of Blackbeard, telling him that one of the rules in his bar was no fighting and that if they wanted to settle it so bad they could do it outside. Hoping that he would just leave, he gave him the package of 50 pies and asked for him to just go. The man glared down at Luffy, who glared back harshly before he seemed to decide that it just wasn't worth it. Instead, the man picked up his package and left the building without a glance back. Someone came bursting through the doors, calling that he was looking for someone with a straw hat. They all looked, to see a tall and darkly tanned man with unkempt blonde hair as well as a scar just above his right eye and a mark of a smiley face with a slash through it on his chest. He then saw Luffy at the bar and started walking towards them. "Who's this guy?" Luffy asked impatiently. "Looks like he's got a bone to pick with you, Luffy," Zoro muttered as they watched him come nearer. "He must be that Bellamy guy who rented out that hotel we were at," Nami whispered to them, as they had earlier went to a hotel for info, only to find it booked by a pirate captain named Bellamy the Hyena. Bellamy was right next to them, towering over Luffy as Luffy commented that everyone they were meeting today was huge. Bellamy ignored that as he ordered a glass from the top shelf and told the bartender to give Luffy anything he wanted. Soon, the rest of Bellamy's crew came in, talking in loud voices about how disgusting and cheap this bar was. One of them, a guy wearing a long coat made of fur, took out a bent knife that was as big as a sword, and actually slashed one of the other customers so that he could get his seat. The man with the knife sneered at the dying man on the floor, "You'd be in a lot less pain if you'd offered us your seats already." Pathetic harbor trash. Several others ran out of the bar in terror, gasping at how it was, Big Knife Sarquises. Meanwhile, the bartender brought out the drinks that Bellamy asked for and stood back, clearly not wanting any trouble as Bellamy said to Luffy, "Cheers." "Hey, thanks for the drink, pal," Luffy said cheerfully. "You know what, you're alright," Luffy said as he started to tilt his head back to drink when suddenly, Bellamy slammed Luffy's head into the bar table so hard that it shattered. The whole bar went silent and stared at them as Bellamy smirked. Zoro had his blade out and was holding it to Bellamy's neck. "And what are you doing, punk?" Bellamy asked him, as if amused that Zoro turned his blade to him. "That's the question you should be asking yourself," Zoro sneered, his face dark as night. Bellamy only sneered at him, as if enjoying the thought of fighting him. Nami was behind him, pleading with Zoro not to fight, that they still needed information, but he interrupted her, telling her to be quiet because if this guy wanted to fight, he was more than happy to give it to him. Luffy turned to face Bellamy, asking if he was ready to take him on or not. Bellamy only grinned wildly at him as everyone else cheered on, wanting to see a fight. "You've got it all wrong, kid, this isn't a fight, it's a test." Bellamy laughed. "Now come on, let's see how strong you are." Looking worried that a fight would break out, Nami turned to the bartender and asked quickly, "Mister, we're trying to get to the Sky Island, do you know anything about that?" The bartender stared at her as the bar went silent once again, all of them staring at her. Others began whispering to each other on that subject, clearly unable to believe they heard right. Luffy glanced at them all in confusion. Nami looked just as confused, but went on bravely with her question, "Like I was saying, if you knew how to get to Sky Island." But before she could finish, the whole bar burst out laughing, startling them all as everyone around them began to mock them about searching for a place that didn't exist. Nami held up her wrist so that they could see their log and she yelled out, "What the, you can look at the log pose yourself. It's pointed at the sky plan as day." That stopped them all laughing for only a brief moment before they began laughing once again, mocking and taunting Nami who was turning a bright red color. Bellamy sat down sharply, slapping his knee as he also roared with laughter. "You got me there, kid," he yelled out. "I can't believe you guys are putting hope in such a ridiculous legend like an island in the sky. Especially considering how little you know. Like how out of the thousands of weird currents in the Grand Line one of them is called a knock-up stream." He then stared at Nami. "Looks to me like this is the first time you've ever heard about it. Any ship that get caught up in the knock-up stream is catapulted into the sky and later slams back down into the ocean." Bellamy continued to laugh. "Years ago, a bunch of ignorant sailors saw a bunch of ships falling from the sky and assumed that there must be an island up there somewhere. In their minds, how else could a ship get up that high?" He stuck his tongue out with a deranged smile as he finished, "Ha. Ridiculous. Anything that seems supernatural always has a rational explanation. Anything a man can dream can eventually be explained, and let me tell you, the truth will hurt." The bar continued to laugh with Bellamy, however, as Luffy seemed to grow angrier, his hands now fists, as if he was fighting back the urge to punch this guy. Bellamy sighed again as he looked to them. "What a shame. Look, I was gonna to let you into my crew if you passed the test for the new era, but it seems like you're a lost cause." Bellamy glared at Luffy like he thought that he was not worth the trouble anymore. Thing is, the time of pirates' dreams are over. The City of Gold, the Emerald Ruins, and the Great One Piece, fools who dream of these fictional treasures don't notice the real treasures all around them. Bellamy laughed. In this age of oceans, the very men who are capable of navigating currents end up chasing these ridiculous dreams and die in the process. Bellamy's smile got even wilder as he said mockingly, whenever these people speak of these dead idiots, they always say, he was happy because he died living his dreams. Ha! No. He died because he was a fool. Luffy glared at him, his fist slowly loosening up as his anger seemed to vanish so that there was no emotion at all on his face. But then, Bellamy held up his own fist and declared, so when I see people chasing dreams of One Piece I get disgusted. And without raising a hand to defend himself, Luffy just shut his eyes and allowed Bellamy to hit him so that he fell back onto the ground. Nami cried out in shock. Zoro didn't react at all as he looked at his captain, as if wondering what it was he going to do about it. Bellamy suddenly went on speaking, laughing as if he knew the answer to the meaning of life. You're a weak pirate just like they were. And as long as you're hacking around you're making us, the real pirates, look like trash. And then he threw his glass at the floor, narrowly missing Luffy's head, who was still lying there, staring up at the ceiling. Luffy didn't move at all, just laid there with an empty expression, as if he was merely bored as everyone followed Bellamy's example and began to throw food and drinks at them. Sarkis encouraged Bellamy to beat them up, who was grinning back only too eagerly. Nami finally couldn't take it anymore. Luffy, Zoro, forget all about all that pacifist crap earlier. She screamed. Take this jerk out. Luffy slowly sat up, not even reacting to the food and drink around him as he looked directly at Zoro and gave him one order. What he said stunned Nami. Zoro, no matter whatever happens, don't fight back. Zoro looked just as expressionless as Luffy, though a little cold. Nami was stunned as she watched as Bellamy and his crew attacked. They began to punch and hit them, like they were practice dummies. She watched as they threw food at them and Bellamy took a long sip of booze before he spit it all into Luffy's face. But no matter what they did to them, neither one fought back, even as Bellamy slammed Luffy's face right through a window, leaving the steady dripping of blood on the shattered glass. Nami went running over to them both, still trying to get them to fight back, but what Sarkis said next got a chill to go up her spine. Saying that he wanted to buy her. Nami stared up at him as she hissed, excuse me. Did you just say that you wanted to buy me? That's right, Sarkis said with a rather evil grin, come on girl, join us. Nami didn't look angry, but her face had turned to one of a disgusted smirk. I hate to say it, she said, her face dark, but I'm too good to be seen with a pirate like you. You're nothing but a small-time thug. The rest of the bar laughed at them, with Luffy and Zoro lying on the floor, no longer moving. The only other person who wasn't laughing was the bartender, who was cleaning some glasses and just watched. His own expression was empty as Bellamy threw his glass down like a child having a tantrum, and yelled at them to get out of his sight. With as much poise as she could muster, Nami picked up both men by their shirts and dragged them out as they continued to throw bottles at them the whole way out. As Nami dragged Luffy and Zoro they heard a familiar voice proclaim, the Sky Island does exist. Nami had her head turned right towards the man from before, who was eating his pies, sitting on the ground watching them with a curious expression. After he took a big bite he said with a laugh, that place really does make a killer cherry pie. Nami seemed to be expecting trouble. She dropped both the boys and snarled at him, got something you wanna say? Now what could you possibly be angry about? The man asked cheerfully with a wide grin. Your two friends won that fight without ever throwing a punch. The man began to laugh again, but unlike the men back at the bar, it wasn't a mocking or belittling laugh, more like one of respect. And this was proven when he said, I respected the way you treated them back there. You've got nerves of steel, lady. Zoro and Luffy got up and began to dust themselves off. Fixing his hat, Luffy turned his bloody face towards the man, looking at him with that same unreadable look that he had given Bellamy. The man only grinned a little wider, looking at Luffy with a great deal more respect than he had before. He then said, this new era they keep rambling on and on about is a load of crap. The era where pirates dream of treasure will come to an end. Yeah right. The man laughed again just as he slammed his whiskey bottle onto the ground and called out loudly, getting everyone's attention around them, the dreams of pirates will never end. There was silence from everyone as Luffy still didn't react at all, like he could see something in the man that they couldn't. Am I right? The man challenged, and soon his shouting had caused the crowd around them to laugh good-naturedly at him, asking what he was talking about. One-upping your peers isn't easy, was his only answer before he calmed down enough to look directly at Luffy, answering, they can laugh at us all they want because when you aim high, you often come across fights that just aren't worth fighting. Right. Zoro told the other two that they should just go. Nami had no problems with that and was about to follow him until she noticed that Luffy still hadn't moved. Luffy? She asked softly, but he was still giving the man that long and hard look, and they knew him well enough to tell that he wasn't happy with what he saw, but didn't say anything else as the man stood up, his bottle and sack of pies back in his hands. Oh, it looks like I interrupted you, he said as if he just realized that he was being rude to a group of shoppers. Are you in a hurry, kid? Luffy didn't answer, however he didn't seem to be expecting one as he turned and raised his drink. One more thing, he added, I hope you find your way to Sky Island. He turned and laughed as Luffy also left, leaving him behind. Nami was now pressing the boys, suggesting that they should go back and talk to that guy and that he might know something about Sky Island. Nami was then asking if they had any idea who he was. I dunno, Luffy confessed softly, in serious voice that was almost unheard of from him, but it's not he. Nami looked at him in confusion and asked, if it's not he then, what is it? Probably they, Zoro answered, who seemed to know what Luffy was taking about as his captain rubbed some blood off near his mouth before the two headed onwards, not bothering to answer any of Nami's questions as she asked what they were talking about. Later they were back on the Merry with Zoro and Luffy both cleaned up and Chopper treating their many cuts and bruises. So, what happened to you guys? Usopp asked in concern, leaning against the railing and watched as Chopper dabbed disinfectant on a deep cut on Luffy's arm. It looks like you were mauled by a pack of rabid wolves. It was pirates, Luffy admitted before he assured him, but we're okay. Just some scratches. Yeah, Zoro added, looking as if they had just got into a simple misunderstanding, but Nami was looking put out as she sat on the stairs, her back to them all. You guys seem to be okay with everything, but I certainly am not. She said as the boys looked at her. She seemed to be trying to hold her rage back before she lost it and began yelling out, what's wrong with you two? You are men right. When someone provokes you, the only logical response would be to pummel their faces and then wipe up the blood with their friends' faces. Or better yet you should have just blown up the entire annoying town. Zoro asked what happened to all her pacifist talk, but shut up at once when she turned the evil eye at him. Shut up Zoro. What's past is past. We're not talking about ancient history here. She shrieked at him, shaking with anger. Usopp was asking Luffy why she was in such a bad mood since she didn't get a scratch on her. Luffy answered he had no idea. Chopper then bravely asked if they found any information on Sky Island, which seemed to bring up those bad memories from Nami as she slowly turned her wrath onto him, who was crying in fear. Chopper and Usopp, who were scared so badly, that they were guarding themselves and pretending to be dead. But Nami didn't seem to notice as she screamed out that she honestly couldn't care less about Sky Island anymore. That all she had to do was say the name and they laughed at her. She then screamed out, demanding to know what was so funny about saying it. Thankfully, Robin returned at that moment and Nami turned her wrath onto her. Yelling that if it turned out that Sky Island didn't exist, she was going to throw her overboard with rocks in her pockets for good measure. Usopp warned Robin to keep her distance for a while until she calmed down. Robin only smiled as she gave Luffy a map of this island, telling him that she got some information on it. As they looked over it, they saw that they were at the point labeled, Mock Town, but on the other side of the island was a large X. And Robin told them that apparently a man was banished there because he didn't blend in with the town here. Didn't blend in, Usopp and Luffy repeated in surprise. His name is Mont Blanc Cricket, Robin explained as she headed to the door to the galley. Apparently Mr. Cricket talked about his dreams too much. Sounds like you have something in common. She smiled brightly as she closed the door and Luffy beamed at the map, loudly proclaiming that they needed to go pay this guy a visit. They were back out at sea on the Merry, with a large ship right in front of them. It looked a great deal like Masira's ship, with the giant trees that served as masts. The sides of the ship were covered in little doors and ladders where some men, dressed in wetsuits, were climbing up, and a large orangutan skull and crossbones for the Jolly Roger. Luffy asked the others if this was the same salvage ship from before, with the others dismissing that, saying that though it looked the same, it wasn't Masira's crew. Usopp and Chopper both nodded in firm agreement behind them, saying that they saw those guys and it turns out that they docked at Mock Town just like most ships in these waters. And they reasoned they must be all the same as the guys who fought them. A large man who looked like an orangutan with long green hair and wearing a black button-up shirt that is too small for his body showing off his hairy torso. Can you believe I got all worked up, wondering who you people are? He asked them all. Your face looks weird, Luffy called bluntly, what species are you? I'm human, moron. The now identified human named Shuju yelled angrily as his crew all yelled in outrage as well. That there was no one out there who knew more about underwater search than their captain. But Shuju calmed them down, going on to admit that his temper was short these days because he wanted to be named as the next warlord since Crocodile was defeated, but he hadn't gotten the news yet. Luffy asked Shuju, so your goal is to become one of the 7 warlords of the sea? Didn't I just say that? Shuju called in annoyance, but then he went on to introduce himself, bragging about how he never cut his hair once in his whole life. But when Luffy said that was lame, that got Shuju angry. However, when Luffy told Shuju to move, the ape seemed to lose it as he screamed out, you just don't get it, do you? This is my turf. If you want to pass, you either pay the toll or be sunk. Got it. Usopp, who was crouching low behind Chopper, began asking what he was talking about, his turf. He's starting to sound like our old friend Masira. He ended. Huh? Luffy asked, looking at him in surprise. Masira said stuff like that. That also got Shuju's attention. Masira. He asked at once, what about Masira? If you must know, Luffy said, looking back up at him, we kicked his butt off our boat. But we didn't think. But Shuju screamed in outrage as he yelled at him to how dare he kicked his own brother. Wait, hold on, Luffy yelled, trying to make himself heard, listen to me. Sure we threw him off our boat, but I bet he's alive. Shuju was far from listening as he pulled out his microphone and began to scream into it. No one could tell what he was doing at first, but the sound waves from his voice was actually causing pain to his crew and destroy his ship. The Straw Hats didn't seem to think it was anything to worry about until the Mary was also being torn apart. The planking was coming up, the patches that Usopp worked so hard to fix were falling apart and looked close to being blown away. The Straw Hats realized what was going on and knew that if they stayed for too much longer, they were sure to sink. Nami calmed down from her experience in Mock Town enough to give them all orders, and soon they were able to sail away from the range of Shuju's voice. Though the damage had been done, the Mary was in such bad shape that they were actually leaving a trail of debris behind them, and Usopp was now pulling planks of wood and his tool set out as they quickly began patching it up as best as they could. As the boys patched up the ship as best as they could, Nami and Robin were looking over the map. We left Mock Town and headed east by circling around the northern shore of the island. Our destination is here, Nami said as she traced the path with her finger before she looked to Robin and asked, we're supposed to meet that man here. What's that name? His name is Mont Blanc Cricket, she answered calmly as they turned the bend. And you're sure he'll be able to help us out, right? Nami asked, but her voice was drowned out by Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper when they spotted a beautiful palace right on the edge of the water. The Goofy trio were gapping at it, but the others all sighed at it, having already figured out what it was. It wasn't until Luffy jumped off to get a closer look, and yell in shock did they all find out that it was just a paper covering part of a house that looked like it had been carved right in half. Nami asked Robin why Cricket decided to live here. I don't know all the details, she admitted leaning against the rails, but I think it has something to do with his belief that a large amount of gold rests somewhere in the hills of Jaya. Gold? Usopp cried in excitement. Do you think he's here looking for some kind of buried treasure? Nami asked at once, her eyes lighting up. But even when Robin admitted that she didn't know, Nami didn't care as she began chanting about gold and berry marks in her eyes. In fact, as soon as they landed, she was having Chopper digging up places around the house. But Luffy didn't really mind as he stuck his head into the house, looking for anyone who lived there. After he confirmed that no one was home, Usopp snapped at him to get out of there in case this guy was dangerous. But as they started making themselves comfortable, on a large tree stump, Nami found a book and started to read it out loud for them all. Noland the Liar. Nami began reading it out. About how an explorer named Mont Blanc Noland who always told amazing stories about his adventures. But they sounded so far-fetched, no one was sure if they were to believe him or not. One day, when he returned from one expedition, he reported back to his king that on an island he found a city built out of solid gold. To see if Tor himself, the king took 2,000 of his own soldiers and set out with Noland to find this city for himself, fighting off powerful storms and sea monsters. By the time they finally found the island that Noland talked about, there were only 100 of his soldiers left. But all they found was deserted island with an ordinary jungle. Because of this, the outraged king sentenced Noland to death for his lies. His final words before he was executed were the followed. I can only assume that the city of gold sunk into the sea. But no one believed him anymore, even though he never swayed from his story until he died. Luffy, who was kneeling near the water's edge, was looking down to see bubbles coming up and bursting at the surface. As he looked a little closer, something was swimming up towards him. Hey, Chestnut, Luffy asked in wonder as he saw the strange object. Suddenly a large hand shot out of the water and grabbed Luffy by the front of his vest. With a startled scream, Luffy was pulled right into the sea, and that's when he blacked out until it came back with Usopp pulling Luffy back out of the water. Usopp snarled at Luffy to be more careful. Luffy coughed up seawater and tried to explain what happened. Once he had coughed the water all up, he asked who that man was. They looked to see a rather muscular, middle-aged man with blonde hair, and a large chestnut on his head. He was also bare-chested and barefooted and had a strange tattoo of a chestnut with the word, maroon, on his arm, but he was laying on the ground and struggling for air, as if in terrible pain. As they pulled Luffy out of the sea and Chopper was carefully approaching the man to get a good look at him for any injuries. Once the reindeer doctor was sure that he was out cold, he ordered for the others to bring him inside the house so that he could see what was wrong with him. Chopper told them the whole story. He explained that he was actually really sick and suffering from a serious disease known as Kaisen disease, or decompression sickness. Apparently a condition arising from dissolved gases coming out as bubbles inside the body on depressurization. Since bubbles can form in or migrate to any part of the body, DCS can produce many symptoms, and its effects may vary from joint pain and rashes to paralysis and death, and it happens with divers. Luffy naturally called it a mystery disease, even Chopper explained it in full detail. Chopper gave them all orders on how to help this man, knowing just what to do to make him comfortable and ease up some of Cricket's suffering. But Chopper confessed to them all that he wasn't sure if he could help him here, guessing that he must have been diving every day for years without letting his body fully rest, and it finally caught up to him. That was why he collapsed during the fight. As they watched the scene, no one really bothering to talk, two more guests showed up. Both Masira and Shuju appeared, so big that they couldn't fight through the doorway together and had to settle by sticking their large heads in. "Hey old timer," they cried together, "are you alright?" As they looked up and saw who it was, Usopp and Chopper screamed, as they started to run around in fear as Usopp cried out, sounding close to tears, "They've come to kill us. What in the world are you people doing there?" Shuju demanded angrily. "And what do you think you're doing to our friend?" Masira added just as angry. Luffy answered, "We're trying to help. So I suggest that you either lend us a hand or find somebody else to bother." Usopp was screaming at him not to antagonize them, reminding them what they were capable of, and was even suggesting that they just jump outside the window and run away. But then the two oversized monkeys surprised them all by thanking them and practically crying, startling over Usopp and Chopper. The Straw Hats explained what was going on. Luffy went outside so that they could really talk to them, already getting along great with them like old friends. As they listened in, the two admitted that they did live here as well, but spent most of their time on their ships since this place was too small for them. It turns out that this little house was the headquarters for what they called the Tsuruyama Alliance. Shuju was talking to Luffy, saying how impressed he was that he got Masira off his ship like that, which Luffy responded that he was sure that even he could kick his ass if he tried. Chopper came running out of the house, calling Luffy that Cricket was awake. As he went in to see him, Shuju had kicked Masira and seemed surprised that he was able to do so as he went flying off into the distance. Cricket was sitting up, a great deal calmer than before, and smoking a cigarette like how Sanji did before he spoke. "I'm sorry I attacked you," he said sincerely. "I thought that you were nothing more than another group of bandits who had come to steal my gold." Nami's eyes turned to berry symbols. "Did somebody say something about gold?" "Just calm down, Nami," Usopp hissed as Cricket asked, "What exactly was it you wanted to ask me?" Luffy walked over to him and said eagerly, "We're searching for Sky Island. And we were told you might be able to tell us how to get there." "Are you serious?" Cricket asked before he burst out laughing. "Don't tell me you believe that place actually exists." The laughing ticked Nami off, looking ready to slug Cricket. With Usopp desperately trying to hold her back as Luffy cried out, "You mean there's no Sky Island?" "Are you sure?" Though he had calmed down greatly, Cricket was still chuckling as he admitted, "I don't know." He breathed a little more on his cigarette before he finished. "See, nobody really knows if the Sky Island exists or not. I know only one man who claims to have seen the island himself, but he's considered a liar of epic proportions." Luffy turned to look at Usopp and Usopp asked what they were looking at. "There's an old fairy tale that the people in the North Blue know very well," Cricket went on. "It's called Noland the Liar." Again, Luffy looked to Usopp. "Quit looking at me, Luffy," he yelled, "my name's not Noland." Sanji spoke from a chair near the window. "Now that I think about it, Noland's family name was also Mont Blanc. Does that make you related to him somehow?" Nami gasped if that was true as well. Cricket looked out one of the windows and admitted it all without any shame. Noland was his distant ancestor. However, he also added that they were so far removed, he doubted that he had any of Noland's blood in his veins. He acknowledged that his family was driven out of the North Blue a long time ago. And though his family may deny the name, they have never hated Noland for it because contrary to what everyone else believed, Noland had been a very honest man. Cricket went on to state that he knew that Noland was far from stupid. That he truly believed what he saw and stuck to this story even though he was put to death for it. Usopp got excited, thinking he had it all figured it out, that Cricket came here to prove Noland right and clear the family name. However, Cricket lost it. "Don't be ridiculous." And to their surprise, he fired at him, freezing them all as they stared at him. Though it was clear that he never intended to hit him, missing him clear by a mile, it was enough to get his point across. "I don't even care if the City of Gold exists or not. The actions of my ancestor have nothing to do with me and my life." Cricket screamed out, "You can't possibly begin to imagine what it's like. As a kid for everyone to laugh at you and ridicule you cause you're a descendant of that idiot Noland. That's what I dealt with my whole life." Cricket took several calming breaths, putting the gun back down. Cricket declared that many members of his family tried to do the same thing, to find the city and clear the family name. But in the end each one of them died in the attempt, long before they even reached the island. Ashamed of his family, Cricket ran away from home and became the captain of a crew of pirates. He did not necessarily wanted to become a pirate then, he just wanted to escape the curse of carrying the Mont Blanc family name. However, 10 years ago, Cricket and his crew accidentally came across Jaya, the island that Noland supposedly found the city and the island that so many of Cricket's family members failed to find their way to. Standing upon the cape where the City of Gold was supposed to be, Cricket decided to accept his fate and find out once and for all if there was the legendary city that Noland found or not. His crew however, did not agree with his decision and left him alone on the island. Cricket finished his story by telling them that he began diving all alone in these waters every day in search of any clue of the City of Gold. "I don't care if I find the city or not. Cricket finished with a sigh. I'm not here to prove Noland right or wrong. I have no interest in rewriting history. All I'm doing is following what I believe to be my destiny. This is between me and Noland. I am facing what I fear. And whatever the outcome, the act is all that matters. His words moved Usopp to tears. But what about the monkeys? Luffy suddenly asked. How did they come to be on this island with you anyway? I'm sure that's another story of bravery in the face of incredible odds. Usopp said tearfully, your life reads like a great book, you know Cricket. They're just fans of the fairy tale, Cricket answered, and that ticked Usopp off. How did they find you? Nami asked with a few sweat drops around her head. I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago, Cricket said, thinking back. They heard a rumor and set out to find me. Those two truly believe that the City of Gold exists somewhere and they're me find it. It was truly touching to hear Cricket admit that they showed up out of the blue one day, proclaiming themselves as his followers without his permission, and became part of his crew without asking. Though they were loud and did nothing but fight all the time, Cricket allowed them to help him in his search and accepted them as his surrogate sons. To Cricket, their barging into his life out of the blue saved his life from the constant loneliness he felt before they came. With this, Cricket became the leader of the Tsuruyama Alliance. Together with the two brothers and their pirate crews, they had been searching all around Jaya for the lost city. Once he told him how much he had grown to enjoy their company and put him at ease, Usopp cried again. But Luffy said bluntly, are you just about finished telling us your life story? Shut your mouth, you ungrateful brat. Usopp yelled, punching him, which Luffy responded by throwing him off him and saying loudly that all he wanted to know about was Sky Island. Cricket chuckled again. You're a pushy guy, aren't ya? He asked in amusement, but like I told you before earlier, the only person who's claimed to see Sky Island is Noland. And nobody knows if it's the truth or just another tall tale. He then reached to the bookshelf next to him and pulled off a very old and worn out book as he flicked through it. Is there any record of his trip to the island? Luffy asked hurriedly. Officially. No, Cricket admitted, but he does mention it in here. Nami then gasped, asking if that was Noland's logbook, and Cricket threw it roughly at her, telling her to read there. She looked at it in amazement, and read out things that Noland had claimed to have seen, such as sky fish, and the sky waver that was said to be created in the Sky Island, along with many other strange and fabulous objects. As she read on, everyone's eyes grew wider and wider with every word, like a fascinating story that they wanted to know the ending to. Do you know what this means? Nami cried out excitedly. Sky Island must really exist. Luffy cried out, and seeing that, the Straw Hats all knew that Luffy was now determined to head to the floating island no matter what it took. Cricket was in front of a tree stump that served as a table as Luffy, Usopp, Nami, and Chopper sat down, listening to him talk. Listen up and listen good, Cricket said. I decided to tell you guys everything I know about the Sky Island. Most of this is rumor and hearsay, so you'll have to make up your own minds whether you believe it or not. There's something very strange that happens in this part of the ocean. He pointed out to the sea. Everything will suddenly turn dark as night, right in the middle of the brightest day. Luffy held up his hand as if he were in class and exclaimed that happened to them as well. Yeah, Usopp agreed at once. It was like the sun vanished. And then these enormous monsters showed up. You've seen the giants, Cricket said, not sounding the least bit surprised at that. There's a tale on where those things come from, but forget about it for now, we can go into it later. Now about this sudden nightfall, it's caused by the shadow of an incredibly dense cloud. But Nami was lost, telling him that it was too dark for clouds, it was as if the sun went out. He then explained that this cloud is special from every other cloud in that it forms high in the sky, has no internal air currents, and never turns to rain. No light can reach the ground, and it turns even the brightest day dark. These clouds, called the cumuloregulus cloud, never changed at all, and some people actually believe that these clouds are like fossils. Petrified clouds that drift around for centuries unchanged. Nami doubted all that before Cricket added that this was all rumors that he heard, and what she believes is up to her. So it's a mystery cloud, Luffy decided upon. Instead of telling him he was stupid, Cricket agreed with that statement, but also said that there was only one place that Sky Island could be, and it's on top of one of those clouds. Luffy and Usopp were both cheering, getting ready to go, but Nami hit them both, screaming at them that they still didn't know how to get there. Yeah, that's gonna be the hard part, Cricket agreed, because you'll be risking your life every minute. You mean like now? The boys whimpered behind him, Chopper looking at their beaten and swollen faces. There's only one way to get there, the knock-up stream, Cricket answered for them. It shoots straight up in the air, so theoretically, it can take you into the sky if you're lucky. Luffy was looking thrilled at this idea and said that all they had to do was hitch a ride when it next went off, but Nami countered by asking if they would end up falling back to the ocean and get smashed to pieces. Usually, that's true, Cricket stated, unless you can get the timing just right. It's one thing to sit here all comfy and talk about riding the knock-up stream. But if you think this trip is gonna be some kind of pleasure cruise, you're in for a very rude awakening. Luffy had wide eyes as Usopp and Chopper both looked freaked out. Cricket said that he heard many theories about it, but only one has ever made any real sense to him, however no one's ever been stupid enough to confirm it. The knock-up stream is apparently created by giant underwater pockets below the ocean floor. Water seeps in, and is heated by geothermal energy until it turns to steam. At some point the pressure becomes too great and explodes, sending a giant stream upwards. The strength of each particular event varies dramatically, but they all last for about a minute each time. 1 full minute. Nami cried out in shock, getting up. Do you realize how enormous an explosion like that would have to be? Cricket turned his back on them as they tried to digest this thought as he finished. Anyway, you can't really explain something like this with words and theories. It's one of the great mysteries of creation. So, Usopp said, summing it all up, so then, we gotta ride this current that shows up 5 times a month into to reach some island in the sky, and just hope it's waiting for us. I'd say that sums it up pretty well, Cricket said. And if you miss, you fall back down, slam into the ocean, and get blown into fish food. Just like you said. Usopp, pale and sweating, turned to Luffy's smiling face. Okay, so we're gonna forget about Sky Island, right? The two laughed, though Usopp a little forced before he said seriously, that this was nuts. That they would have to be beyond lucky to be able to pull off a stunt like this. But Luffy's eyes were shining at the thought and said that they will go anyway. Usopp reminded the captain about the Mary's condition, that she'll never be able to withstand something like that in her condition. Cricket agreed, saying that she was worthless, even Brand knew she would never have been able to survive it. Usopp frowned at him for that, as if almost tempted to do it just to prove that the Mary could, but let the insult slide before he thought that it would settle the matter. But then Cricket surprised them by offering to fix and reinforce the ship, which Masira and Shuju happily agreed to from inside the house. Nami then reminded them that they could only stay on this island for 1 more day before the log pose reset and they'd be forced to move on. Usopp beamed at that thought and asked Cricket when he thought that the next time the knock-up stream would line up with those clouds, clearly sounding like he believed that they would be long gone by the time that it did line up perfectly. But that didn't last when Cricket stated that it would be at around noon tomorrow. Wait a minute, you mean we can make it? Usopp screamed. Afraid so, Cricket said, back still to him. If you're scared then don't go. Usopp's eyes turned angry and he began to shout, pointing an accusing finger at him. You're lying. Cricket turned to look back at him as he went on yelling, there's something's fishy about this. We've known you less than 24 hours, why are you being so helpful? And what's more, Luffy then stepped up, looking angry as he tried to tell him off, but Usopp snapped at him to shut up before he turned back to Cricket, yelling, this Sky Island, this legendary place, that we don't even know the location of is just gonna show up out of the blue. At noon tomorrow. And to help us get there you're gonna rebuild and reinforce our ship, for nothing. When something looks too good to be true, it probably is. Usopp yelled, the infamous liar Noland was your great-great-grand would ever write. So how do we know we can trust you? Cricket didn't seem fazed at all by this as he pulled out his cigarette and looked at him, Usopp tense up as if expecting a fight. The 2 monkeys were calling from inside the house that dinner was ready and Sanji came stumbling out and noticed the tense atmosphere. Untroubled, Cricket said as he slowly walked to him. Masira said, whenever the midday night happens in this area, the cumuloregulus cloud appears in the southern sky the next day. Based on its usual cycle of 5 appearances a month, I'm guessing the knock-up stream will also erupt tomorrow at midday. That will probably also be to the south. I can't be 100% certain, but there's a good chance the 2 events will coincide. Cricket walked past Usopp, whose anger faded to a look of nervousness and confusion. I'm proud to have met a bunch of brave fools like you, he said warmly, you're true pirates. Meanwhile, shame came over Usopp's face at those words as Cricket finished, now then, let's go inside and eat. Tonight I want you to call my home your home, my friends. Those words were enough to cause Usopp to fall to his knees and Luffy smiled happily at that. Usopp, feeling down for his behavior, apologized to Cricket. Cricket, however, was a bit disgusted by Usopp as he was rubbing his running nose on Cricket's pants while apologizing on his knees. Soon they back inside Cricket's house, with all the straw hats, Cricket, and the monkeys laughing and enjoying a good party. Masira was chasing Usopp around for tricking him to eat hot sauce, Cricket was drinking so much that his face was red, and Luffy and Shuju were dancing together. Nami was sitting in the background, reading Noland's logbook. Cricket noticed it as well and when he went over to her, he quoted from a passage, the skull's right eye. That's where I saw the gold. And they all fell silent as they looked to him, waiting for him to speak as if he was giving a speech. Those words, smeared with tears, were the last words Noland wrote in his logbook, Cricket answered as he stood up. The skull's right eye, that's where I saw the gold. That very same day, Noland was executed. I still don't know what he meant by that, it doesn't refer to the name of a city or some landmark that used to be on the island. Or is it just a poetic allusion to his own impending death? The blank pages that follow give us no clue. Cricket sighed, his face still red as he tilted his head back and drank deeply, and that's why we continue to dive to the bottom of the sea, we dream. The Straw Hats all raised their glasses high to that as they went on to enjoy the party. It was fun to watch, even as Cricket took the logbook and began to read out a particular entry. It was when Noland first arrived on Jaya. They heard the peculiar cries of a strange bird and the ringing of a grand bell. In our pride and arrogance we thought we've seen and heard everything in our short lives, Cricket recited, obviously knowing this part by heart, but the sound of that bell tolling left us all speechless. It was as if the clang of that bell all struck us dumb with wonder. Cricket let out a loud cry which Luffy and the monkeys echoed happily. Hey old timer, it sounds like you just might be a little fond of Noland after all, Usopp teased and they all laughed. Smiling, Cricket pulled out a few bags from a trunk. He passed one of them to Masira before he sat back down and opened up the one he still had and revealed 3 miniature golden bells. Usopp stated that they didn't seem so impressive to him, sounding a little let down. None of these is the bell that Noland was writing about in his logbook, Cricket informed him as Nami picked up one and ran her hands over it lovingly. These are bell-shaped golden ingots we found on the ocean floor during a dive. Golden ingots, Chopper repeated in surprise as Luffy cried out happily that the city of gold was real. It's still not proof though, Shuju said sadly as he sat up from where he fell over from drinking too much. You can find golden relics like that lying around any old ruin in this part of the world. Maybe so, Robin agreed, but that does suggest there was some civilization here sometime in the past. Ingots are made to divide gold into standard unit of weight, and that would indicate an advantaged trading society. Right, Cricket spoke up to what Robin had said, and you remember that peculiar bird call he said they heard when they arrived. He looked to Masira and told them to show it to them. He opened the bag and revealed the enormous chunk of gold that was carved into the shape of a strange-looking bird holding a bell. As they all gasped in wonder at it, Cricket told them that was the last of it as Nami swooned over it, reminding them all of how Sanji did the same whenever he saw a cute girl. Golden bells and birds, huh? Sanji smiled, do you think that these are symbols of some ancient, giant civilization? Cricket shrugged at Sanji's question, but said that he was sure they had all come from the same casting. He then began to talk about the golden statue being a south bird and that they could still find some on the island today. Masira began to talk more about them about how sailors had used them on their ships, but before he even finished, he and his brother both stared at each other and Cricket gasped. Oh no, they yelled out so suddenly that it startled them all. What's wrong? They cried out in surprise. This is really bad, Cricket said, his face no longer holding any trace of the party and was deadly serious. You guys gotta get to the forest on the south side of the island quick. When Luffy tried to ask what was going on, Cricket pointed to the gold bird and added that they had to go and catch one of the south birds and fast. The crew asked why they needed the bird. Now listen carefully, Cricket said crossly, tomorrow you're gonna sail for the Knock Upstream. It lies directly south of here, how are you gonna get there? We just sailed a ship due south of course, Luffy said obviously. Have you forgotten this is the Grand Line? Cricket yelled at him, you're heading for open sea. You won't be able to get your bearings. Nami gasped at that, realizing that he was right. That since they were in the Grand Line, the Straw Hats would not know where to go south since normal compasses would not work. Also since the place that they were headed to was a location in the sea and not an island, the log pose would not help either. Cricket told them that they could still make it if they could capture a south bird and follow its direction. These strange-looking birds have an odd habit of always pointing their head south, no matter where they are. Because of this, they were used in ancient times to navigate. With it, they could get the direction and just follow it. You see, Cricket finished explaining, if you don't get going to that forest and catch one of those birds right now, you'll have to kiss your only chance of going to Sky Island goodbye. And you're just telling us this now. They yelled at him, looking panic-stricken as they all jumped up and ran to the door, bursting outside and headed for the trees as Cricket threw them several nets, letting them know that they would get started on the repairs to their ship in the meantime before he reminded them that they had until morning to find one of those birds or to forget about the whole thing. Luffy took several steps forward before he halted mid-stride and you could practically hear the cogs turning in his head. Then, it was like a light bulb went off in his mind. Turning to his still-running crew, the Chimera captain called out, hey, hold up guys. The Straw Hats stopped, if somewhat reluctantly, before turning back towards Luffy. What is it now Luffy? In case you didn't get it, we're kinda on a time frame here. Nami snapped out, silently swearing she'd kill the kid if it was some sort of stupid question or other pointless distraction her captain wanted to mention. With a quickly forming smile, Luffy declared, I just realized, we don't need to find a southern bird, cause we already have one. With that, Luffy changed his shape. When he was done, the straw hat-wearing pirate was a large, rather chubby-looking bird with a body of purple and bright green feathers. He had a large toucan-like beak that was an assortment of colors, while his head looked a bit like a fish. Grinning at the gobsmacked looks on both the crew's and the Alliance's face, Southern Bird Luffy let off a cry. Jayu. While the Alliance members continued to gawk, having no previous knowledge on Luffy's powers, some of the other Straw Hats face-palmed. I don't know what's worse, Zoro muttered with his face still in his hand, that we missed such an obvious solution to the problem, or that it was Luffy of all people who figured it out first. To be fair, Usopp pointed out while trying to find the silver lining, we just found out about the southern birds, and that we had to find them ASAP made us all act before thinking. Now though, we don't have to go through a creepy-looking forest for a bird. He seemed cheerful about this at first, before his face fell as he realized that now there was nothing holding the crew back from the possible suicide adventure. After explaining Luffy's powers to the Alliance, Cricket coughed into his fist and said, "While that's impressive, do you still possess the Southern Bird's directional ability? Are you sure you're facing south at all times?" Luffy cocked his avian head for a moment while contemplating Cricket's question. He then turned his head to the right and held it there for a little bit before a look of extreme discomfort came over him and his head snapped back into its previous position. Huh, that felt weird. It was like, no matter what position my head was in, it only felt like it was supposed to be facing that direction, Luffy commented as he went back to his human form, giving his neck a crack for good measure. Looks like Luffy's sense of direction is spot on, Robin commented in amusement as the rest of the crew agreed. Then, the senior members of the crew all looked over to Zoro, who looked confused at the stares he was getting. "What?" he asked irritably. "Maybe you should keep Luffy with you at all times. Maybe then you'd know which way south is at the least," Sanji suggested with a barely contained smirk. The rest of the crew snickered at that as a vein pulsed on Zoro's forehead. "Oh screw you guys," he shot out before walking away in a huff. Cricket cleared his throat and said, "Now that that's all settled, you all should probably head in for the night while me and the brothers get to work on your ship. After all, you'll need your wits about you tomorrow to make sure everything goes according to plan. You should probably set up camp a little ways away from here so the sounds of us working on your ship don't disturb you. We'll come to get you at first light." The crew agreed, knowing the former pirate had a point. After saying their goodnights, the Straw Hats went a short distance down the beach and set up some of the tents Nami had brought from Alabasta. One by one, they fell asleep to the sounds of hammers pounding and other sounds of construction echoing down the beach. A few hours later though, they were awakened by the sound of an almighty crash that was followed by cries of pain and, curiously enough, cheering. Going to maximum awareness in a split second, the crew barged out of their tents and ran down the beach towards Cricket's house to find out what was going on, and what they saw enraged them. Parts of the house and the ground around them was torn up. The house itself had 2 giant holes as if someone had shot a cannonball through them, but the 3 were in worse shape. Masiro was lying on his face with a deep bleeding gash down his back, Shuju was floating unconscious in the sea, and Cricket was dripping blood all over as he lay there. Usopp gasped when he saw the Mary, the front half almost broken in half, now lying sadly on the ground and the mast snapped off like a twig. And there, standing over Cricket's form was the same man from earlier that day, Bellamy the hyena. Standing a short ways from him was Big Knife, Sarkis, wiping blood from one of his oversized knives. Standing around them was Bellamy's crew from earlier, cheering and laughing at the display of brutality. No longer thinking about not fighting back, the Straw Hats leapt into action. As the other members of the Straw Hats went to both make sure the brothers and the Mary were okay, Luffy, with a burst of speed that momentarily surprised the enemy pirates, was now looking over Cricket, who had woken up. "Sorry kid," he gasped, when he saw him. "You're alive," Luffy said in surprise, trying to help him, "Don't try to move around." The whole time, Cricket was mumbling an apology about letting this happen even as he tried to push himself up. Sarkis suddenly let out a laugh, causing the crew to look at him. "Hey, if it isn't the pathetic rabble from earlier. And look, they even brought along more of their trashy friends. Why'd you come, hoping to steal the gold from this old coot too? Well forget it, we were here first, and if you want it back you'd best be ready to receive worse than you did earlier." It was then they noticed that by some of the gathered pirates the wrapped gold Cricket had shown them earlier lay at their feet, further enraging the Straw Hats as what happened all came together. Bellamy and his crew must have heard of Cricket's gold and decided to come and steal it for themselves. The Alliance had obviously tried to fight back, but had fallen to their assault. And from the look of the damaged area, the fight hadn't been pretty. With a hard look on his face, Luffy called out, "Everyone." The rest of the crew looked at him and he said in a dead serious voice few have heard him use, "Keep the old man and the monkeys safe, I'll take care of these creeps." Zoro looked at him calmly, already knowing what he was going to do and asked, in a tone that clearly said that he already knew the answer to, "You want any help?" "I'll handle this one alone," he said firmly, moving his hat back to hide his eyes. This was answered by the others with mixed expressions. Most of the crew didn't say anything, already knowing what he was doing as well and fully supported his decision on it. Nami was telling him that they only had 3 hours left before they had to set sail. But he didn't answer her, merely turning to face his opponent, who grinned at him cockily. "Bellamy," he shouted, "I'm gonna take you down." "Huh, you're going to take me out? You've gotta be joking," Bellamy called, sounding just as conceited as he did from before. "You've got something to say to me kid." "I do," Luffy yelled back. "Gives back Pop's gold. Every bit of it, right now." "What gold?" Bellamy asked, though he clearly knew what he was talking about before he burst out laughing. "You mean the junk we got from Old Man Cricket?" Rather than answer, he hunched over, crouching low before he was able to jump, almost fly, though the air before he was able to spin around and landed gracefully behind Luffy. Bellamy's legs had changed, becoming all twisted around to show he ate a spring-based devil's fruit. "Maybe it's news to you, but that's what pirates do. Ever heard of looting? Bellamy taunted him. But what am I saying? You're just a pathetic dreamer who can't open his eyes long enough to get a good look at the real world. Luffy glared at him, speaking in such a way that Bellamy looked taken aback by his tone. Well, then. If stealing is what we pirates do, I guess I should just steal the gold back then. Bellamy roared with laughter at what Luffy said. That's cute, but be serious. He yelled, can you really fight? I mean, do you even know how to throw a punch? I saw your fighting skills earlier. Bellamy sneered at him when Luffy didn't say anything. You're very good at just standing there. Luffy's eyes narrowed dangerous as Bellamy mocked him, telling him that standing still wasn't going to get the gold back. What, you're freezing up like this afternoon? Admit it, you're too scared to fight me. This afternoon was different. I'm not scared, Luffy said neutrally, the moon at his back making him look like some kind of demon of the night. But Bellamy just laughed, saying that was a good bluff, but he was now sick of listening to him, and decided to shut him up for good. The spectators watched as Bellamy's spring-like legs kicked off, destroying the ground right under his feet as he shrieked out with laughter, don't worry, this won't take long. And when he landed on one of the trees in the area that cracked under the pressure, he finished his attack, Spring Sniper. He shot towards Luffy like a torpedo, who didn't look impressed as Bellamy came flying at him. At the last second he jumped off the destroyed roof of Cricket's house, soaring through the sky just as gracefully as Bellamy had, and some of the people on the ground started talking about it, some impressed, others not so much. The Straw Hats, meanwhile, watched in silence as they all knew there was really only one outcome for this match. Luffy landed awkwardly on another tree before he got back up and glared around at Bellamy, who was still undergoing his relentless attack. Once, he almost ended up falling right over the edge to the ground below, and was forced to grab onto a branch to keep himself from dropping. The whole time Bellamy bragged and laughed at Luffy, taunting him at how weak he was and that he was never going to get the gold back. He darted from tree to tree in the clearing, each one cracking like a toothpick when he jumped off, looking like a demented pinball. The fight went on, Bellamy making them all angry as he kept yelling things out like he was pathetic for believing in dreams or that he was a disgrace to real pirates. Finally, Luffy was knocked from the trees and landed on the ground, and Bellamy continued to jump around him, laughing insanely that he couldn't beat him no matter what thanks to his devil fruit. Big Knife, Sarkis laughed, egging his captain on as the other crew members mocked Luffy as well. The Straw Hats, meanwhile, resisted rolling their eyes as they could feel this sham of a fight was ending soon. Luffy stood up from where he fell to the ground, completely unharmed, his expression cold as the rest of Bellamy's crew seemed shocked that he was getting up. But Bellamy's face was smiling at the thought of crushing Luffy as he then launched himself at Cricket's house again. Using the building and the trees in the area, he bounced from one spot to the next, increasing in speed with each successive spring. Luffy just stared ahead of him as Bellamy continued to rant on. So, you want the gold back, huh? He yelled, his voice seemed to come from all around them. Because old man Cricket is your friend. Wake up. He's nothing but a decrepit fool who spends all his time chasing after a 400-year-old lie. But that's probably what you like about him, right? Bellamy went on as Luffy's eyes turned into slits, filled with anger, and his face darkened even more so that he looked like some kind of beast ready to kill. You like to call yourselves pirates, but you know nothing. There's no city of gold. No island in the sky. Just oceans and ships and the men who sail them. Meanwhile, Luffy's anger had grown to such a point that they could almost feel it radiating in the air around them. He held his fist up, they could hear the cracking of his knuckles even through the noise that Bellamy was making. You asked if I know how to throw a punch, he called out even as Sarkis laughed, asking that he hurry up and beat him so that he could go back to town for a drink. Bellamy was finally tired of playing around, screaming out, so long, Straw Hat. It all happened so quickly that most of them missed it. With a single punch, Luffy slammed Bellamy right into the ground, his head breaking through the wooden walkway, leaving a large crater all around them. Bellamy's eyes rolled into the back of his head, blood spurting from his mouth and the imprint of Luffy's fist embedded into his face. Bellamy was out cold before his head cracked the wood beneath him. Luffy's knuckles were covered in blood. He didn't respond at all, however, as he slowly put his hat back on his head, his eyes still darkened so that they couldn't see anything. He hadn't even needed to use his powers to defeat the man. No one said anything as they heard Bellamy croak a little from where he lay, showing that he was still alive, but the crowd around them were suddenly as silent as the grave. Sarkis stepped forward, stuttering out in a shocked tone, but sure that this had to be some kind of bad joke. Hey, quit messing around, Bellamy, and get up, the joke's over. We know that runt couldn't beat you. Come on, get up. Most of them looked ready to turn tail and run when Bellamy just continued to lay there. Sarkis seemed to grow angrier with every second that his captain remained on the ground, and soon he was shouting, this really isn't funny anymore, now snap out of it. You have to get up and show that kid who you are. You're a real pirate, not like him. Sarkis continued to scream out that his bounty was up to 55 million and that he couldn't lose. Luffy turned towards Bellamy's crew and gave them a cold glare. And now, Cricket's gold. Give it back, he demanded, in a tone that showed that he wasn't kidding around here anymore. Almost everyone turned and ran away, scattering around them into the forest as if hoping that it would protect them from Luffy's wrath. But Luffy no longer had any reason to go after them as he stood there, waiting for an answer. The main part of Bellamy's crew, the ones who had been there that afternoon, were so startled that some of them pointed fearfully to the bag behind them and Luffy marched over. As he went inside, they went over to Bellamy, trying to get him up and on his feet again. Luffy came back, the large sack on his back, smiling as he calmly went towards a stunned Cricket as if he had just done some grocery shopping. He was even chuckling a little to himself as he walked. That wasn't too hard to find, he said as the remaining Bellamy pirates were with Bellamy, who only continued to lay there helpless. Sarkis was on his knees, shaking as he looked after him. Suddenly he got to his feet and began to yell, "Hey, you come back here. You hear me? You stupid runt, I'm talking to you. I'll get him. We won't be beaten by some pretend pirate. I'll show you a real punch." Sarkis continued to yell after Luffy, "Where are you going?" When Luffy did stop, his words died on his tongue and they froze, looking ready to run back if they had to. Luffy merely held up the bloody fist as he asked, "Where am I going?" Sarkis fell back, looking ready to wet his pants. Luffy didn't threaten him, or say anything else to show that he won. It was as if the fight never happened, but instead, he slowly looked back before he held up his finger to the sky. Up there. Now, Luffy's face took on a bestial quality and you could swear that the entire animal kingdom was now glaring at the rapidly sweating pirates. "Get lost," he roared, and in a puff of dust, the enemy crew had fled at near supersonic speeds, taking their out-cold captain with them. He then turned back to the crew in the Alliance, the former who were all warmly congratulating him or asking why he took so long while the later could only stare with their jaws hitting the sand. The next day with the sun already high in the sky, Luffy was there with the rest of the crew and staring at the Mary. Though the ship looked to have proper patches and work done to her, she still looked a bit worse for the wear. But also, she was now looking more like a rooster than a sheep. The Mary was now sporting wings attached to her sides, and a curved tail at the back, as well as even sporting a wattle and a comb. Luffy however was looking at it with glowing eyes as Usopp walked proudly over to it. Introducing the Going Merry, Flying Edition. He cried out. "It can fly." He cried out. Usopp pointed happily to the Tsuruyama Alliance and told him that they built it just for them, and Nami was whispering that she had a bad feeling about it. Zoro seemed to be thinking along the same thing as he agreed, stating that chickens couldn't fly and that a pigeon would have been a better choice. "What's that got to do with anything? You dope." Nami snapped at him. "It's time to set sail." Usopp cried out, "Come on, if you're with me let me hear it." They all cheered and were all quickly getting on their ships and raising anchor, with Luffy being last on board, giving a final look to the Alliance. Though heavily bandaged and bruised, the Alliance looked 100 times better than they had last night. Cricket didn't say anything, didn't say thank you or asked if he was alright, he didn't even acknowledge what he did after the fight last night. But Luffy didn't seem to have been looking for a thank you. After breathing out the smoke from his cigarette, Cricket said, "Well, what are you waiting for? Get on board, unless you wanna miss your chance at the sky." Like a fool, Luffy just smiled. That was probably the closest he was going to get to a thank you from the old man. "Thanks for the ship," he said gratefully. Cricket just put out his cigarette and jerked his thumb at the Tsuruyama Alliance, telling him that he should be thanking them for doing all the work. Luffy did just that, and even gave them a Hercules beetle he found last night when going back to the camp as a way to say thanks. Shuju looked thrilled at the gift and ordered his crew to get a cage for their new pet. Shuju and Masira were both calling out that they would lead the way to where the knock upstream was going to erupt. And as they followed Luffy, they heard Cricket's voice calling out behind them, calling to the Tsuruyama crews. When they all glanced back at him, he was standing tall as he gave them his orders. "I'm counting on you men," he called. "I don't care what happens. You give our friends everything you've got." They all cheered on in agreement, soon pushing off from the shore and giving Cricket their goodbyes. With both ships on either side of the Mary like guards, taking them out to sea, Cricket appeared at the shoreline, calling to the Straw Hats, "Well, kid, looks like this is where we part ways." Luffy looked over the tail end as he went on, "There's only one thing you gotta remember, above everything else. Not one person, in history, has ever disproved the existence of Sky Island." Cricket declared with a smile and they all nodded in understanding. "People may say I'm crazy and even laugh at me, but I don't care." Cricket declared to them all, "I'm a romantic. Like you." As they drew further away from shore, they heard Cricket's voice calling out, "Oh yeah, thanks for the gold. And hey, don't be falling from the sky, you hear?" As they left Jaya behind them, Luffy returned to his southern bird form and the ships followed the direction his head was pointing. Soon they could see dark clouds in the distance and Nami was calling for everyone to come out at once. Nami screamed to the others. The cumuloregulus cloud appeared a lot sooner than expected and now everyone's scrambling to find a current. Shuju let out another loud wailing with his voice to use for sonar, and after a few minutes, the divers came up, finding the place where the whirlpool was sure to form. Masira then called that they were to head right for that spot. The waves around them were growing higher and more violent as they struggled to get through. Robin called to Nami as to where the log pose was pointing. Nami did a quick check and answered, "It's pointing right at those clouds." She was staring above them at it as Usopp gasped, "The Sky Island is right above that." Just then, Masira's ship threw a few hooks behind them and hooked onto the Mary as they began towing it. "What's this?" Luffy asked while trying to turn his head to get a better look, only for Usopp to bonk him on the head saying he was their compass and compasses don't look around for the fun of it. "We'll lead you to the inner edge," he answered as Nami asked what they were supposed to do once they got there. "Position yourself on the floe and head to the center. Then you'll be fine." But that was when they spotted the whirlpool, and several of the crew screamed at that. To say it was huge would be the usual understatement. It looked like a large, dark drain, one large enough to have easily swallowed a fleet of marine ships. "He wants us to go to the center," Nami screamed as they headed straight for it, the ship sticking just on the outer rim, just far enough away to avoid the current and getting sucked into the dark pit. "But I don't want to get sucked in," Usopp screamed in fear, all of them clinging to the ship as the ropes connecting them to Masira's ship let go and they were set adrift. "I don't remember signing up for all this," Nami screamed out, looking like she was about to have a heart attack. Sanji proclaimed that he'll make sure nothing happened to her. The Straw Hats were all staring at the whirlpool, and even Robin sounded uneasy as she commented on how she had never seen a whirlpool as big as this one before. Chopper however had his face shining with excitement at the thought of flying while Usopp screamed, tears falling from his eyes, that he changed his mind and wanted to go back. "Sorry, Usopp, too late for that," Zoro told him in his usual bored tones as he jerked his thumb to Luffy, who was already looking like he was about to fall over from happiness. "You know who is already excited." Luffy screamed out that they were going to the sky. But just then, something burst out through the water in front of them. It was a sea king, a large and bright yellow one that looked like a giant, fat salamander. It apparently got too close to the whirlpool's edge and was now being pulled in, down into the darkness until it disappeared. The Straw Hats all froze at that, staring at it with a mixture of expressions from calm all the way to freaking out. The Mary was now drifting on the current, slowly being pulled to the center. "It's time for us to go," Masira called to them. "The rest is up to you now. Good luck. Bye guys," Luffy called, as he transformed back waving happily, "and thanks a lot for everything." But not everyone agreed with that. 3 members broke down completely and began to scream at them. Usopp especially freaked out. "Don't go. Don't go, I don't wanna die. Please take me with you. Give me a break, I'm scared. Oh, please don't make me," and he ended by breaking down with Chopper wailing by his side. Nami was just as freaked out as she finished for Usopp. No one said anything about diving headfirst into a giant whirlpool. "Plus it's getting dark," Usopp said tearfully. "Oh, cry us a river," Zoro yawned out. "Just hang on and hope for the best." "Well, excuse us for being scared." The weakling trio screamed at him as Chopper screamed that they were being sucked in. "Don't be so unreasonable, Luffy. Let's go back while we still have time." Usopp hollered at him, now looking close to passing out. "Don't you understand that this Sky Island stuff is just a bunch of make-believe? It's not worth getting us killed. It's all make-believe. Is that what you think?" Luffy asked him, his voice almost annoyed, and he didn't bother looking at him. But Nami was on Usopp's side, also crying and looked ready to start begging if she had to as she cried out, "Usopp's right. I think this is a really bad idea. It may be a stupid dream, but I have to try," Luffy said, still staring ahead before he looked back at them all with his eyes glowing with excitement. "It could be our greatest adventure." Chopper seemed to have been put at ease at his words, but Usopp and Nami were both still crying as they realized that it was too late. Meanwhile, the Mary was continuing to get pulled closer to the center, something that Zoro seemed to have noticed as well. "Instead of wasting your time bickering, you all may want to take a look," he said, not even looking at Usopp, who was asking what he was talking about. Zoro merely pointed and told them that they were now being sucked in. That was all it took for them all to start screaming as the Mary suddenly took off and fell towards the darkness below them. It seemed to fly for just a moment above the hole and began to fall. Straw Hats screamed out in shock just as the Mary fell, but as quickly as the whirlpool appeared, it was gone. For the moment, where the whirlpool had been, it was now calm and smooth as glass. They were directly underneath the cumuloregulus cloud, waiting. Nami gasped as she cried out that it was starting. When they looked to her, she cried out in fear that the whirlpool had sunk beneath the surface. "Hold it right there." All the Straw Hats turned to look behind them at once to see what could be described more as a giant raft than an actual ship, coming towards them. It looked as if someone had just stuck several large tree trunks together with some rope. The only signs of it being a pirate ship was the black sail which bore 3 sinister-looking skulls on it. On the crudely made ship was the man from yesterday, and there were others with him. The old man and his horse with the exploding apples, the large man who wanted to be the fighting champion from earlier, and another man who they hadn't seen before. A rather tall and thin guy with a very sad, calm expression. He wore glasses, but one of the lenses looked to be some kind of crosshair. Over his shoulder, he was carrying a large rifle, and he seemed to be sighing forlornly, as if thinking of something sad. The man, who seemed to be the group's captain, was laughing, looking at Luffy with a great deal more interest than he had when they first met him. Well, if it isn't Straw Hat Luffy. Nami recognized him at once, telling the others that it was that Mocktown guy from before. As Sanji asked what she was talking about, the man declared that he had come all this way to collect Luffy's 100 million bounty. 100 million, Luffy shouted back in confusion. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me, kid. He called as he held up 2 bounty posters. Luffy's bounty had gone up more than 3 times, now up to the 100 million that he had said. He also held up another poster that showed Zoro with his starting bounty of 60 million. It's true, Usopp called, looking at the posters through binoculars at them. He's got a different poster for each of you. Hey, Zoro, congratulations on your new bounty. Sanji went running over to Usopp and asked if he could see one for him as well, which Usopp denied, causing an aura of despair to cover the cook. Luffy and Zoro, however, were celebrating the news of their bounties. This is great, Luffy yelled out, practically jumping for joy. Hear that? My bounty went up big time. 60 million's not too bad either. Zoro laughed proudly. It's not a good thing. Nami snapped at them. It was here that they all finally noticed that the water around them was slowly bubbling and rising up. The Mary was sitting right on top as the water was continuing to go up, like how a cake would start to rise. Usopp screamed out, "Oh no! The ship! It's being lifted up!" Everything seemed to freeze in time for just a brief moment, and then, with an almighty explosion beneath them, with the force of an exploding volcano, they were sent flying as a great canal of water suddenly rose up into the air. It was a giant pillar of water that shook them all, almost shattering the ship on impact as they were sent flying up, sailing right up its side. They were now standing on the wall of the cabin as the Straw Hats hung on for dear life as they were shot up. Chopper was crying as he hung to the mast. Luffy was ecstatic as he hung onto the Mary's new comb, screaming out to make his voice heard over the noise. All right. I can't believe this is actually happening. Let's go to Skypia. Sanji pointed it out. The hull was starting to float, in other words, it was slowly tipping back away from the stream of water. And unless they did something about it, they were going to fall back to the ocean below them. Well, what do you expect us to do about it? Usopp screamed, hanging onto the railing like a flag flapping in the wind. We're having a hard enough time holding on as it is. Or haven't you noticed? Bits of old ships and even the Sea King from before fell from the sky and passed them all, the crew yelling in shock at what they were seeing. See, Sanji screamed as they watched the monster fall to the ocean below them. It's only a matter of time until the same thing happens to the Mary. I know, but what can we do? Zoro called. He and Robin were standing quite calmly on the wall of the cabin with them. We don't have a lot of options when it comes to Mother Nature. We're at her mercy. Usopp lost it completely and began to yell, we're gonna take a nosedive to the bottom of the ocean, all because Luffy had to follow some stupid dream. But Nami seemed to pull herself together, suddenly yelling at them to spread the sail. When they looked to her, she called what they had to do. Though a pillar of water, it was still part of the sea, and they could ride it. Since the wind from below was created from geothermal heat, though packaged differently, it was still wind and water. Everyone suddenly broke into smiles, knowing that their navigator had never led them astray before when it came to where to go. Alright gang, Nami's leading the way, Sanji called, and they were able to spread the sail, and thanks to Nami's orders, they were able to align the ship with its current. The hull continued to rise higher and higher, and finally, the back end lifted up. That was when something miraculous happened. They were flying. We're flying, Luffy screamed joyfully, punching the air. Yeah. We're heading to the sky. We made it, Usopp croaked out, his eyes almost bulging out of his head. Everyone was cheering. They had actually conquered the knock upstream, and the terror around them had turned into excitement. Everyone was laughing and enjoying the ride, as if they had left behind all their fear. If this keeps up, we can sail as high as we want. Nami called over the noise. Hey Nami, are we almost to Skypia? Luffy yelled back, and they shared a grin as she pointed up to the black clouds above them. If it exists, it's past those clouds. She called as Luffy turned his full attention back above them. Past those clouds. He repeated in joy. I can't wait to find out what's up in the sky. Let's punch through them and find out. 1. I hope this changed things up a bit more for everyone. The way I see it, Luffy being able to transform into a southern bird eliminates that depraved scavenger hunt the crew had to undergo in canon. This in turn means the crew could get to cricket in time to prevent Bellamy, who I have close to zero respect for, from stealing the gold, while also giving a reasonable explanation on why they didn't stop the fight before it began. I mean, without the Alliance getting hurt and the Straw Hats just curb stomping Bellamy's crew before they could do anything, that would make for an even more boring chapter and as little to show Luffy's maturation like canon did. Hope you all enjoyed, as soon we'll be in the Skypia arc and some real action should start soon. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is Chimera Luffy by mellra. Chapter 17. The Straw Hats were spread out everywhere, dripping wet and panting for air as if they had all just run a marathon. The air seemed to be so thin that it was difficult for them to draw breath. There was bright sunlight all around, and it took them all several minutes for their eyes to make anything out. The first thing they noticed through the light was that the ride had taken its toll. Both of the Mary's wings on her sides had been broken clean off and the sails had been torn to shreds. They were all gasping and coughing, and then Zoro's voice croaked out, what just happened to us? Everyone alright? No one answered him, too exhausted to speak. Luffy finally got back up and was looking around excitedly. Hey guys, look out there. What is that? The others were slowly getting to their feet, and their jaws all hit the deck when they saw. They were sitting afloat on a sea of white, fluffy clouds. What in the world? Sanji gasped, truly not believing what he was seeing. It's solid white. Luffy cried out joyfully. They're clouds. Chopper yelled, his eyes were practically glowing, looking like he wanted to jump into the clouds and see for himself. Nami was gaping at it all, wanting to know how it was possible, and what was keeping them from falling. Luffy tried to reason that since both clouds and boats flowed it was the same thing. Rolling their eyes, the crew tried to explain it to him that it was completely different until Chopper realized that Usopp had stopped breathing. Apparently the shock of breaking through the clouds was too much for him to take. After a little panicking and CPR, Chopper was able to get him breathing again, but it looked like he was going to pass out again when he got a good look at his surroundings, as if truly not believing that he was alive. He screamed in panic, crying out to know where exactly they were. Basically, Nami whispered, it's an ocean in the sky. No way, Usopp said to what Nami stated, running to the side of the Mary to look down at the clouds. Seriously. Nami was then staring down at the log pose and gave a sharp intake of breath when she noticed the needle. She looked up to Robin and told her that the needle was still pointing straight up. Robin answered reasonably, so we must still be somewhere in the middle of the cumuloregulus cloud. Wait, Chopper asked, sitting next to her, you mean we have to travel even higher? That's what the log pose says at least, she answered. Usopp laughing triumphantly, and when they looked back, he had taken the top of his overalls off and he posed on the side of the Mary. Here I go, Usopp cried out, cloud swimming champ, Usopp. Chopper and Luffy both whistled and cried out, happily rooting Usopp on. Sanji tried to warn Usopp not to do anything since they still didn't know much about this place. But, naturally, Usopp didn't listen as he did a perfect dive right into the sea. Sanji held Luffy back from jumping as well while Chopper was pouting as he looked down where Usopp had disappeared, wishing that he could swim like that as he frowned down at the sea, but as they waited, they slowly began to realize that he wasn't coming back up. As the others joined Luffy and Chopper at the side, Robin spoke up, you know, it's possible that this ocean may not have an actual bottom. Say what? Sanji cried out. Once Robin's words had sunk in, they all realized what she was talking about and looked ready to panic themselves as they stared in horror at the sea before them. Idiot! Zoro cried out, sweat falling from his face, did that fool just fall through the clouds? Eyes wide, Luffy cried out Usopp's name before he jumped up into the air, turning into an eagle hybrid as he went, and dived into the clouds with Sanji yelling out that he just told him not to do something so stupid. Robin called for Luffy to fly as fast as he could go. Luffy flew as fast as his wings could go, though the thickness of the clouds made even his sharp vision obstructed. Fortunately, the consistency of the clouds was soft enough that he had little resistance on his body. Finally, he was able to catch an echoing girlish scream a short ways away from him. Luffy, with a final burst of speed, was able to get out of the cloud cover just in time to see Usopp start to fall out of the sky sea. Reaching out with his taloned feet, Luffy was able to snag the sniper's arms before he fell too far. Don't worry Usopp, I've got you. Luffy called out as he went back into the clouds to fly back up to the Mary. Halfway through, however, Luffy experienced some resistance coming from Usopp's form. Luffy burst back up to the cloud sea a few feet from the Mary, much to the crew's relief. Luffy seemed to struggle a bit getting his lower half clutching Usopp out of the clouds. With a great tug, Usopp came bursting through the clouds, and he was apparently out cold. Yes, Nami cried happily, he's back. But just then something beneath them began to rise up and Luffy cried out, but he's not alone. A giant octopus and with a long, colorful snake-like fish burst through the clouds underneath them, both of them treating Usopp like he was a worm on a hook as they went to try and eat him. Thankfully, Zoro and Sanji took care of both of them. As Luffy pulled Usopp safely on board, Zoro slashed at the octopus and Sanji kicked the fish, but then, the strange thing was that when they did attack, it was like they were fighting giant balloons, they both seemed to pop and the air went out of them. The monster trio were all gasping for air, already looking tired after even something as simple as that. Zoro was suddenly struggling for breath as he croaked out, this air, it's so thin, it's hard to breathe. What do you make of this? Sanji asked, looking over the dead fish, that was now flat as a pancake. I've never seen anything like it before, I'm not even sure if it's even a fish. That octopus thing was more like a big balloon, Luffy pointed to the remains of the creature. Yeah, Zoro agreed darkly, except balloons don't have teeth. How can there be fish up here in the clouds? Nami asked them all, clearly not understanding any of this as much as the rest of them. You said it best yourself, Robin answered her softly, basically it's an ocean in the sky. As they examined the dead fish, Usopp, who had been laying frozen on the deck, suddenly came back to life, now thrashing around. Sanji looked to him in annoyance, asking what the problem was now, and Usopp cried out as he reached his hand into his pants, "There's something in my pants." And suddenly he pulled out a blue fish before he fainted. Chopper cried out in worry as he ran over to see if he was alright, but Usopp just laid there in a fetal position muttering, "Sky Island scary, Sky Island scary." "Not his day," Robin said before she noticed the strange fish on the floor. As Robin examined the fish with Nami, they came to the suggestion that these creatures seemed to have evolved to become flat or balloon-like to make themselves even lighter. But when their backs were turned, they saw that Sanji had already cooked it up and Luffy was gasping out how good it was. Nami however spotted them eating the fish and began yelling at them, "Hey! We were still examining that." She began shouting at them until she tried it and suddenly her anger disappeared, her taste buds melting as she took several more pieces, and Luffy was telling Sanji they should cook the bigger fish. Meanwhile, Chopper was on one of the Mary's broken wings and was looking through the binoculars, trying to find any signs of an island. "Hey guys," he suddenly called excitedly, "there's a..." But his voice died in his throat so quickly that it was as if he hadn't said anything at all, he just continued to stare, turning bone white. "Hey, what's wrong, Chopper?" Sanji asked when he noticed that he had frozen up. But then Chopper dropped the binoculars and fell back, looking like he was about to faint. "What's the deal? You see something out there?" Sanji went on. But now Chopper was freaking out as he began to scream out that he saw a ship out there that had just been destroyed, and a guy running around the clouds with wings. Now he was heading straight towards them, so they had to get out of there. The Straw Hats were all looking skeptical, but when they looked up and saw that he was right. A man, tall and muscular, sporting a pair of tiny wings on his back, and various tribal tattoos across his left shoulder, was heading straight towards them. They couldn't see his face however because he was wearing a large horned mask and was moving along the clouds as if he had little rockets attached to his feet. "Check it out, he's right," Sanji said in mild surprise as he glanced out at the figure speeding towards them, as if this happened every day. "There's a guy running around out there." He then called out to him, "Hey, stop. What do you want?" "To destroy you," he yelled back with a deadly voice. "Oh, is that all?" Sanji asked, sounding ready for a fight as he moved into a fighting stance, with Zoro stepping up as well, snarling that he'd deal with him. Luffy came running up behind them, asking what was going on, but the guy with the mask was already there. The battle after that was short. Even though they had him outnumbered, this guy was able to fight all three of them off. Their movements were slow and sluggish, and so it was easy for he was able to kick all three of them down before he pointed his bazooka down at them, getting ready to fire. Chopper was screaming, sure that he was going to blow up their ship, but then something else came. "That's enough," yelled an aged voice, and they looked up to see two figures coming right at them. They turned back to the battle to see that it was old man with a long white mustache and beard, dressed in armor made of solid metal, who had come to their rescue on the back of a large pink bird with red polka dots all over his body and horn-like ears. But the two obviously knew each other so well, they had no problems working together, and though he was old, he was light and nimble. He jumped from the bird's back and clashed his lance against the attacker's shield, sending the attacker back through the clouds. Gracefully, the old man landed on the side of the ship, with Nami now looking terrified. "Oh, great. Now who's this guy?" The old man turned and stepped onto deck. "Miss," he said politely, "you may call me the Sky Knight." The Sky Knight was looking around them, as if still expecting trouble, but soon sighed as he muttered in grim satisfaction, "He's gone." "What's going on here?" Nami demanded, looking at the knight. "Who is that guy?" But rather than wait for an answer, she glared back at all three men who were lying there having a hard time breathing. "And you, could you be any more useless? You've had him outnumbered 3-1. Chopper was thanking the old man for saving them, who replied that he was just doing his duty and this was on the house. "What gives?" Sanji gasped, and seemed unable to sit up. "I feel so weak." "Yeah," Luffy wheezed, "I could barely move." Robin reminded them that it had to do with the thin air as the old man walked up the stairs, asking if they were Blue Sea people. "Blue Sea people?" Nami asked in confusion, "What's that? And who are you?" "As I said, I am the Sky Knight," he answered calmly, "and Blue Sea people are what we call those who live below the clouds. I'm assuming you traveled here from the Blue Sea." "Yeah, that's right," Luffy said, looking up at him. "Then that explains it," the Sky Knight answered in understanding as he sat on the railing, observing them all with interest. "You have reached the White Sea, 7,000 meters in the air. The Great White Sea, where I assume you're heading, is still further up," he went on, "about 10,000 meters. Ordinary Blue Sea people can't possibly endure it here." Luffy was sitting up, giving his chest a little punch before he began to say that he thought he got used to it, which the others agreed. No, that's just not possible," the old man said, clearly sounding like he didn't believe them. Chopper then tried to ask him who it was who attacked them and why. But the old man stated that they had other business to talk about. He told them that he was a soldier for hire, that the Great White Sea was dangerous since that these, gorilla, like the one who attacked them, wouldn't hesitate to kill them, but if they bought a one whistle for 5 million extols, he would protect them. The Straw Hats were lost, clearly not having any idea to what he was talking about. The old man was looking put out, saying that it was a reasonable price and that he couldn't afford to lower it any more than that. But when Sanji asked what he was talking about, saying that they didn't know anything about Extols or this whistle, it was the old man who looked lost this time. You don't know? He asked in puzzlement. I don't understand. You came here from the summit of High West, didn't you? Surely you must have passed an island or two. I still don't know what you're talking about, Luffy said to Gonfall. Wait, let me get this straight. Nami yelled up at him, now sounding truly ticked off this time. You're saying that there was another way we could have gotten up here, where we would have passed an island or two. As in there's more than one Sky Island. What? Gonfall said, realization coming over his face. Don't tell me you traveled by way of, but it was Robin who interrupted him. We rode up here on the knock upstream. My word, he said in amazement, staring at them all with a great deal more interest, that monstrous current. So there are still souls in the world brave enough to make the attempt. Nami was now crying. I knew it, she whispered, then we risked our lives for nothing. To vent some of her anger, she grabbed hold of Luffy, shaking him violently as she began to scream at him at how she was going to kill him for almost getting them killed and how if they had asked around a little more, they could have found another way up here. The Sky Knight asked them if they lost any of their crewmates. No, we all made it, Luffy yelled up at him. Then you can consider yourselves fortunate, he answered him. If you had taken another route, one or two of you would have survived, but the rest of you would have perished. That's the gamble. By way of the knock upstream either everyone dies, or everyone survives, he stated. Those are the only two possible outcomes. Not many are willing to accept such an all or nothing risk, the Sky Knight continued, especially these days. If nothing else, I see that you are navigators of exceptional bravery and skill. Usopp smirked, trying to take the credit for that before he changed his mind as Nami grabbed his face threateningly. But the old knight was now looking deeply impressed, and it was a surprise to see him pull out a whistle and toss it down to them. Should you find yourselves in danger, you have but to blow it and I will come to your aid. He called as he turned around dramatically. As I said, normally I would charge 5 million extols, but for today please consider this as my gift to you. Nami quickly asked his name. The old man turned back to her. I am, Gonfall. And this is my partner, Pierre, he gestured to the bird next to him. The bird only got weirder, for as the Sky Knight jumped onto his back and bade them a farewell, the bird transformed. A horse with wings that maintained the pink body and red polka dots but with white feathers. It turned out that he had eaten the horse fruit, Pegasus model. It was a bit of a letdown for them all as they watched him fly off, having expected to see it look cooler. Even Luffy thought that for a Pegasus, that was super lame. In the end, Robin stated, once the duo were both gone, he really didn't tell us anything, did he? They all agreed as they looked to the little whistle on the deck. As they began to look around for a way to go, Luffy stated that they should call the knight back and ask him. Nami, Chopper, and Usopp all jumped forward and began to fight over it, struggling over which one of them should have it. It was really quite funny, to hear them fighting over which one of them was the weakest and why they should be the one to carry it, with Luffy, naturally, just wanting to be the one to blow it. In the end, since none of them could agree on anything, Nami fixed the whistle to the mast, saying that if anyone got into trouble, all they had to do was run over here and blow it. Now it was fair to them all, which Usopp and Chopper agreed. Nami then turned her wrath onto Robin and the boys, telling them that they were not to blow the whistle under any circumstance. Luffy groaned out that he wanted to blow it just once, with Nami threatening that if he so much as touched the whistle, he'd be swimming with the sky fish. And they all promised they wouldn't touch it. Once that was settled, they noticed what appeared to be a waterfall in the distance and decided to head for that. They sailed easily through the clouds, much smoother than on water, but as they went further on, they soon found their path blocked by clouds so thick that they couldn't move. Those big clouds seemed to be floating on top of the ocean, sorta like icebergs, Sanji said, pointed out as they tried to figure out what the problem was. So what, they're cloud bergs? Usopp asked skeptically. Well, there's obviously something different about them, Nami said as Luffy offered to transform into a sparrow, fly over and grab a piece, but when he did, it ended up bouncing back like a ball. Seeing Luffy's talons bounce back was all it took and soon he turned into his human form and jumped right onto them, bouncing around on it like it was a giant marshmallow. Usopp and Chopper quickly joined him and they were all bouncing around, loving everything here. Getting frustrated with them, Nami was telling them to quit playing around and that they should be looking for a way to get around them. But Usopp solved that problem. He was standing near the top of the cloud and was looking off into the distance when he obviously spotted something. Hey! Usopp yelled as he and Luffy both came running back down to them. There's a gate up there. A gate? Nami repeated, sounding skeptic. Yeah, Luffy yelled joyfully as he jumped down onto the deck with them all, a big one. It's up ahead underneath that waterfall thingy. Chopper also jumped down from the marshmallow cloud, crashing into Usopp's head, but he was having so much fun that he didn't seem to notice it all even as Usopp yelled in pain. So there's a man-made structure in the middle of the clouds? Sanji asked as they continued sailing on. At this point, I'm not sure anything we find up here would surprise me, Robin answered him. After a little arguing, they soon reached the waterfall on top of the Cloudbergs. And just at the base was a large and elaborate gold and white gate there, the name, Heaven's Gate, carved right above it. Yep, that's a gate all right, Sanji stated, in a little impressed tone. Hold on, Usopp said nervously once he read the name, am I reading this right? Heaven's Gate, what's that about? Sounds like a place you go when you die. Yeah, Zoro asked to Usopp's worry, an evil smirk on his face. Well, now that you mention it, maybe we are dead, you ever think about that? Huh, Sanji stated, thinking that over, you know that would go a long way to explaining this weird place. But I don't wanna be dead. Chopper screamed out. Luffy just laughed, who cares? We're here aren't we? Wherever this gate goes, I'm going. Nami was getting really angry at the boys for trying to scare them and hit them over the heads to tell them to start acting serious. But as they neared the gate, a very old woman came outside, something in her hand, some kind of camera, and began to take pictures. They were all startled by her as she called to them all that she was Amazon, the Heaven's Gate inspector, and she wanted to know what their business was. Sightseeing, warmongering, other. I guess it's kinda like sightseeing. Nami called. We wanna go to the Sky Island. Luffy added, looking unsure as to what to say, it's past this gate right? Can we say all the above? Zoro offered. The old woman said that it didn't make much difference to her, but that they were to pay 7 billion XTOL for the entrance fee if they wanted to go any further. The Straw Hats started to quietly talking amongst themselves that they had no idea what an XTOL was, and even if they did, they doubted that they had enough for that. Usopp hissed to the others that this had to be some kind of scam, but Nami covered his mouth to shut him up and instead asked Amazon what would happen if they didn't pay. You may still pass, Amazon stated. Usopp almost choked on that answer. The choice is yours, she answered, I certainly won't try to stop you. When they looked startled she added, my job description doesn't require me to actually guard the gate. I'm merely here to ask your intentions. Well that settles it. Luffy called agreeably, we wanna go to the Sky Islands. But we don't have the money so we can't pay you. Usopp added. Very well, she said, the 7 of you then. Luffy, still looking surprised at how easily she was letting them go, answered yes, but they still needed her to tell them how to get there. Rather than tell them, 2 giant pinchers came out of nowhere and grabbed down on their broken wings. As they screamed what it was, she answered that it was the Great White Seas Express lobster. Just then they shot forward, the creature was taking them up the waterfall at breakneck speeds. When they looked they could see the road, spiraling up to the heavens in front of them and they began to ride it, the Milky Roads. Soon they saw the sign that read, Godland Skypia. But then they saw a bright light from above them and Chopper cried out, pointing at the exit. But Luffy was grinning as he screamed out excitedly, this isn't the exit, it's the entrance. Up and up they rode, and when they burst through the clouds and were in the bright sunlight. Blinking through the blindness of it all, there it was, like they were dreaming. In the bright sunshine there was an island made up of clouds, filled with sparkling buildings and roads made up of what looked like cotton candy. There were several smaller clouds that held shops and trees, and there were several large roads made up of clouds and embedded with what looked like twisted up vines crossed to the smaller islands. It was gorgeous. The Merry came to the cloudy beach with a little bump and they heard Luffy took a deep breath. I can smell the adventure. He gasped out, his eyes wide. Potent as the seaweed in summer. And he then jumped, with Usopp right behind him running ashore on the soft clouds. And that's how it was, they were like a bunch of little kids during a snow day. They were running around the marshmallow-like beach, with Chopper rolled around, looking like he was drifting off as Usopp began building a cloud castle. Luffy was hanging from the tree, laughing as he pulled some strange fruit off the tree and almost ended up breaking his teeth on how hard they were. This is why we came here, Nami laughed as Sanji ran around with flowers for the girls before they heard the sound of gentle music being played. Looking around, they saw a very pale girl with long, blonde hair tied in 2 braided pigtails. She also had what looked like antennae sticking out at the top of her head and miniature wings on her back. They all stared at her, with Sanji naturally claiming that she was an angel. She played her harp for a few more minutes before she looked to them. The girl slowly turned with a smile at the Straw Hats, as if she had been expecting them. Hesso, she said with a smile in a soft voice. The Straw Hats stared at her in confusion as they tried to figure it out. But then the angelic girl called to a furry creature they didn't notice before. Sue, come here, she called. A solid white fox with squinted eyes and a mouth that looked a little like a snout happily went over to the girl, flicking her bushy tail. As she walked out to Sue as well she addressed the Straw Hats, did you come from the Blue Sea world? If that's what you call it, Luffy called in a friendly voice, we sailed up a river of clouds to get here. Speaking of here, is this your home? Yes, it sure is, she said, putting the harp on her back, and I'd like to welcome you to Skypia's Angel Beach. She noticed the large fruit in Luffy's hand and she laughed a little sweetly as she offered to help him open it. She showed them that you had to cut through the underside to get to the sweet stuff inside. My name is Canis, she told them as she picked up the fox and added, and this little one's name is Sue, she's a cloud fox. If you need anything at all, please, let me be of service. Sanji, naturally, tried to start giving her romantic words, until Nami pulled his ear and threw him down to get him to behave himself. But she beamed at Canis as she walked over to her, and started to ask questions. But they didn't get too far with that as Canis's father showed up on a waver on the sea, and almost crashed into them as he tried to stop. He was almost bald, but had those strange antennae sticking out his head, with a round beard around his mouth. However, he was just as, if not even more, hospitable as his daughter, and he even invited them to their house for lunch. Nami stared in amazement at the waver and asking Canis's dad, Pagaya, all about it. They were in a bright, wide-open house that overlooked the sea of clouds. It was very strange for them all to see the ocean a calming white instead of blue, but at the same time, this place was so welcoming that it was almost like home. Most of the crew was in this room with Canis, and they could hear the sounds of Sanji and Pagaya in the kitchen making lunch. Nami meanwhile had taken Pagaya's waver out for a ride. Canis was explaining the working of dials, how they were strange devices made from the remains of particular shellfish, which have the ability to store energy and matter. The shellfish remains are gathered from the shallows near the shore of the White Sea, and how there were many different types of dials that store various things depending on their type. And how the content can be released by pressing the apex on the other side of the dial. As long as they are not used or damaged, dials seem to be capable of storing their contents indefinitely. Sanji then came in with Pagaya, carrying trays of food that they hadn't seen before, and they began to enjoy their meal, marveling at the exotic tastes. Sanji went to the window, staring out at the sea, and asked them where Nami was. I think she's riding the waver, Luffy said through a mouthful of food. I don't see her, Sanji spoke up, now sounding worried, and Usopp told him to relax, that she probably just went too far out for them to see her. I'm worried, Canis said nervously to her father, do you think she's okay? I have my concerns, he answered back, sounding apprehensive, but I can't say one way or another. Luffy noticed the uneasy looks and asked what the problem was. Canis looked to them and answered, in the clouds, there's a place called the Upper Yard that no one is ever allowed to set foot on. It's not too far away, it would only be a short trip by waver from here. I'm afraid your friend Nami may have set ashore there out of curiosity. What's so bad about this place that no one's ever allowed to go there? Usopp asked after a large swallow of food, is it full of monsters? It's sacred ground, Canis answered him. Robin was looking at Canis in real surprise. But it's so much more than that, Canis said, her face darkening slightly, it's the island, where God lives. There's actually a god, Luffy exclaimed loudly, and he lives on an island up here that no one's allowed to walk on. You mean the god? Chopper asked startled, the same one from all the old stories. And he actually lives on the island next door to you. He does, Canis said almost regretfully. I'm sure that everybody noticed the big sign that said Godland Skypia. That means that this land is ruled by the almighty god Eneru. Sanji looked like he couldn't believe that God would have such a stupid name. He knows and sees everything, Canis went on, he's truly omniscient. He keeps his all-seeing eyes on everyone, always. The Straw Hats were all staring at her, wondering if what she was saying was true. But past Zoro merely leaned back skeptically. God huh? He asked. Wait, you mean you don't believe in God? Chopper asked, but why? Zoro explained, well for me, it's not a matter of belief. I don't see proof of it one way or the other. And to be honest, I don't really care to. But if you want to, go right ahead. It's not up to me to deny anyone their little beliefs. Sanji then looked back to Canis and asked that if this, God, lived so close to them, then she must have seen him before. Her eyes widened at once, trying to say absolutely not, that she knew that the Upper Yard was a place where only God could live. But the way she spoke made it sound as though she was reciting something that she had memorized countless times before. I see, Luffy said, and a dangerous sparkle was in his eyes. A place we're not allowed to go to no matter what. Usopp noticed the danger signs. He screamed in terror before he grabbed hold of his captain's vest and began to shake him hard. I've seen that look in your eyes before, Luffy. And it always gets us into trouble. When the lady tells us not to go because it's sacred or whatever, then that's exactly what she means. We cannot go there. I am not letting you drag me down with you this time. Hey, Luffy said in a falsely innocent voice that none of them believed, I know that we're not supposed to go there. Come on, you really think I'm the kind of guy who would do that? Without hesitation the Straw Hats all said, yes, absolutely, with Robin giggling at it all. But then Luffy asked Canis that if this really was God, shouldn't he forgive them no matter what, and that walking around on the Upper Yard didn't seem too serious to him. Canis tried to tell him that any law set by Eneru was always met with punishment. Robin then asked her what these punishments were, and Pagaya told them that they believed that anyone who set foot in the Upper Yard never returns. Everyone who goes there dies. Usopp yelled out as the cigarette fell from Sanji's mouth when he finally understood why they were so worried about Nami going out too far. I must admit, Pagaya said softly, I'm as worried about Nami as all of you are. I hope she hasn't sailed too close to the Upper Yard. Sanji spun around and began screaming Nami's name out the window, as if hoping she could hear him, and Luffy was already saying that they should go out and look for her. You don't care about saving Nami. Usopp yelled, shaking him one again, you just want to satisfy your twisted desire to do the exact opposite of what you've been told. Soon they were all back on Angel Island's beach. The Straw Hats, Kanis, and Pagaya were all standing. In front of them were a large group of men with uniforms consisted of light purple t-shirts, blue with white cloud-shaped spots, wide trousers. Well, look at what we have here. The man in the front, wearing a long cape, obviously their leader, as they looked at the 6 present Straw Hats. You must be the Blue Sea dwellers who have illegally entered the land of Skypia. Prepare to have the full weight of heaven's judgment brought down upon you. These men served as Skypia's lowest level of law enforcement, the White Berets. You're calling them criminals? Pagaya asked in astonishment as Kanis looked fearfully at them all. Luffy asked the two of them what they meant by illegal entry, and Pagaya responded that it just wasn't a good thing. The captain pulled out a stack of photos from his coat and stated that Amazon took those photos and there was no point in denying anything. As Pagaya tried to explain to the White Berets that they weren't the criminals they thought they were, Sanji quickly got annoyed and asked for what felt the 100th time, just what this whole thing was about. Does this have to do with that ridiculous 1 billion XTOL entrance fee? Robin asked, because we didn't pay her a thing. But didn't that old lady say that we didn't have to pay for it? Usopp asked, it's not like she tried to stop us. Yeah, that's true, Chopper said. Enough. The captain, whose name they learned was McKinley, said loudly, there's no sense in denying it, now fess up. When no one spoke, he went on, don't worry, you need not become panicked just yet. According to heaven's judgment, illegal entry is only an 11th degree crime. Once you accept your punishment, which will be minimal, you become legal tourists on the spot and may go about your business. Well, you should have told us that sooner, Sanji said, but he sounded highly suspicious about the whole thing before he demanded to know what they had planned for them as far as punishment before they accepted anything. A mere slap on the wrist. McKinley answered, all you need to do is pay 10 times the entry fee. Of course, if you pay immediately we'll forget this little episode never happened. So 10 billion per person, times 7 people, makes your total 70 billion XTOLs. Cash only. Usopp was calling out to know just how much that was embarrassed. McKinley told them that the payment would have been 7 million berries, and Sanji dropped his cigarette once again as he yelled out, get real. Do you realize how expensive that is? After risking our lives coming to this place, why should we have to pay a stupid fee just to enter your precious city? We can't agree to that. You brought this upon yourself. McKinley yelled, still in that annoyingly loud voice. If you had just paid the 700,000 berries in the first place, we wouldn't be having this talk. That's still way too much money. Sanji yelled and the others all nodded at that. But the White Berets were clearly not interested in listening anymore. This is your first warning. McKinley yelled threateningly, the White Berets serve under the vessels of Almighty Eneru. Arguing with us will only raise the number of your crime. The Straw Hats all chose to ignore what McKinley was saying, talking among themselves about what it was they should do. With the White Berets watching them, Usopp managed to buy them time by convincing Luffy that they should wait for Nami where they were in case she came back for them. But as they waited, every minor thing they did seemed to raise their crime level. Such as the broken waver they brought with them, which they were accused of destroying before stealing. This waver looks downright abused. McKinley yelled as Luffy told Pagayu that he hoped that he could fix it. If I find out you're responsible for this damage, you're looking at a 10th degree crime. Destruction of Sky Island property by a Blue Sea dweller. Pagayu tried to explain that he was the one who broke it as Luffy added that this one belonged to them anyway. McKinley looked skeptical as he went to it and went on, is that right? Sounds suspicious to me. I was under the impression that waivers didn't exist in the Blue Sea world. If this one was stolen from Skypia, the decree of your crime will increase. It's not stolen. Luffy snarled, wanna fight about it? And it went downhill from there. Usopp was running around, trying desperately to keep the fragile peace between them and the White Berets, hoping that Nami would be able to bail them out when she got back. But when he tried a simple distraction, fishing, they ended up catching a rare sky fish that tried to eat Kanis, until Zoro attacked it. The White Berets declared that this fish was so rare that it was illegal to catch it and their crime level was now to the 9th decree. Why is that a crime? Chopper screamed out just as angrily, that thing was gonna eat Kanis. Zoro saved her life, but the White Berets just seemed to be glad for any excuse to declare that they were in trouble. Even when it turned out that Zoro didn't kill the stupid fish, Luffy still tried to eat it, which went to their 8th decree crime. After they sent it off on its way, Luffy, Zoro, and even Chopper were all growing more and more irritated with the White Berets, and even when they tried to take a nap and started to snore, their crime only increased. The Straw Hats had just about reached their limit. Luffy was all for beating them up and Zoro was already getting his swords out at that order. Usopp was doing his best to try and prevent a fight breaking out, but they all knew that these guys weren't going to take it for much longer. But just when things were getting serious, Nami finally returned, calling out to them from the waver. Luffy, promise you won't start any trouble, okay? Don't know if I can keep that promise. He yelled back, "Hey Nami." Usopp screamed out desperately, "We need you to fork up 7 million berries from your stash to pay for all the fines we got." "Oh good, so we pay the fine and we're clear," she called before she seemed to realize what he said, and a very dangerous smile came over her look. She suddenly sped up and rammed the waiver right into McKinley's face, screaming out, "You're ripping us off." Time seemed to freeze for a moment before McKinley was sent flying off, crashing through the ground and lay there with blood dripping down his face. Nami brought the waiver back to its owners before she turned to the crew and said that it was time to make themselves scarce, telling them that Eneru wasn't someone they wanted to mess with. As they all looked over to McKinley laying there, Zoro asked Pagaya, sounding like he already knew the answer, "I assume that's another crime on our records." "Oh yes," Pagaya said fearfully, "quite, knocking out an official is a crime of the 5th degree." "Fifth huh?" Usopp asked, not looking too worried, "Could be worse." "That's not good at all," Kanis said, shaking a little. "Once you're found guilty of committing a 5th degree crime, Almighty Eneru will banish you to the land of the drifting clouds." Usopp asked what was so bad about it, and Luffy commented that it sounded like fun to him. "It's a death sentence," she cried out, "You die. We die." Chopper, Usopp, and Nami cried out in horror, looking close to running to the Mary and getting the heck out of here. "You got him good Nami," Zoro stated as he pointed to McKinley, who was still out, and the other white berets who were examining him worriedly. "But come on, a death sentence in God's land. That's quite the contradiction, but it's the truth." Kanis cried out, sounding close to screaming, "This is very serious. They'll put you and your ship on a small cloud and set you adrift in the sea with no hope of rescue or escape. You'll eventually die a very slow and painful death. It's terrible." Sanji shivered at the thought, knowing how painful that would be, and she would be right, there wouldn't be any hope of escape in this situation. After all, who would think to look for you on a cloud? Robin thought that over before mentioning that was probably what happened to that ship that fell on top of them. When they looked to her, she reminded them of the Saint Briss, the incident that started them on their quest to find Skypia, and for all they knew that crew could have been punished just like that over 200 years ago. At those words, Nami went deathly pale and went to the other white berets and tried to trick them into believing that she hit their captain by accident when she lost control of the waiver. Luffy started to say that it looked like she knew what she was doing to him, with Usopp having to drag him away, hissing at him to keep his mouth shut. Pagaya stepped in and suggested that they should carry McKinley up to his house to treat him. Once understanding their priorities, the white berets, for some reason, crawled away before warning the Straw Hats not to go anywhere. Once they were gone, Kanis told the Straw Hats that she truly didn't believe that they were as bad as they were made out to be. But she screamed at them that they should take this chance to leave before it was too late. As Kanis went running off, Nami quickly explained to the others that they were going to do what she suggested. That she saw the island and it was full of monsters. Luffy was looking excited at the very thought, but Nami snapped at him that they were leaving now, and if they hurried they shouldn't cause Kanis or Pagaya any trouble. Since they were with the white berets, they shouldn't be suspected of helping them. Robin, Usopp, and Chopper were all climbing on board, with Sanji and Zoro halfway out as well. But Luffy hadn't moved, staring at Angel Beach with Nami asking what the problem was. "Why are we running away?" Luffy asked her, his voice oddly emotionless. "Because we're in trouble," she said loudly as if it was obvious. "So what? We're always in trouble," he said, in that same calm tone. Nami tried reasoning with him by saying that if they didn't leave then Kanis and Pagaya could get arrested too. "But they haven't done anything," Luffy stated coldly. "Whoever arrests them is an idiot." Nami was staring at Luffy, muttering that she already knew that, but, however, Usopp interrupted her, yelling that they could argue on the boat, and they were getting ready to leave. Nami nodded at Usopp's words and understood that they were out of time. Glaring back at Luffy, she yelled loudly and slowly so that he couldn't hope to mishear, "How many times do I have to tell you? Staying here means more trouble for everybody." But Luffy was still calm. In fact, he was starting to creep some of them out by how calm he was here. Before he answered, "We're in trouble no matter what." Nami was looking at him in surprise, probably just as confused by his sudden tone as they were, but then they heard Kanis's voice call out behind them, "Save yourselves. Please go." All of them spun around to see that the white berets were back. McKinley was on his feet, his face heavily bruised and showed signs of former bleeding, but he was smirking at them triumphantly, as if they had just caught a bunch of kids breaking the rules, which in a way they did. But he warned Kanis that if she said anything else, he'll label them as accomplices, so they had no choice but to keep their mouths shut. But then the white berets began their attack on them. Luffy told Nami to head back to the ship, which she did without complaint as the white berets created long, purple clouds for them to ride on with skates that were powered by jet dials. The fight was fun to watch to say the least, if very short. Luffy jumped into the middle of the group of berets, turning into his namesake when he landed. The monkey man gave a cry of, "Monkey mayhem," and he unleashed a flurry of punches and kicks of increased speed that went every direction due to his body's natural flexibility. As expected, Sanji laughed, before he noticed the tip of an arrow aimed for the monkey idiot, sticking through the purple clouds. That's dirty, attacking when your back's turned, Zoro said as he and Sanji took out the men with the arrows easily. The monster trio were now turned back to look at the Mary, asking how their money situation was, and they learned that they were practically broke. Only enough to last them one more day at most. McKinley was on his feet again, though barely, as he smirked evilly at them all. Sorry criminals, but you have no chance of escape, he declared, and the Straw Hats all looked back at him. You should have behaved and done what I told you to do. Of all the upholders of law here in Skypia, we White Berets are the most lenient. McKinley went on. However, they are not nearly as forgiving. He laughed cruelly as he declared, congratulations. You are now considered second-degree criminals. You can try to cry for mercy, but you will all be judged. He pointed a finger dramatically at them, by the priests of Upper Yard. HESO. Later, the Straw Hats were there with Canis and Pagaya, but the White Berets had cleared the beach, with Luffy glaring at their retreating backs. What's wrong with those guys? A lot if you ask me, Zoro yawned, wondering when they would get to see more fighting. It was starting to get boring. Forget them, Nami yelled, turning them back to the matter at hand. That old lady ratted us out. She lied to us. She said it was okay for us to pass through. But when we did, they accused us of illegal entry. That's flat-out fraud. Exactly, Usopp said, but then even if we were told we couldn't pass, we would have just forced our way through anyway. I mean, how is that little old lady gonna stop us? Nami told Usopp to shut up as Pagaya told them regretfully that since they were now second-degree criminals, he and Canis couldn't help them anymore and moved back far away, as if afraid of catching something. But Nami didn't seem upset at them before she turned her anger to Luffy, who still wanted to go to the Upper Yard. She began giving him a pounding, telling him that they didn't know who or what Eneru was, but his powers were deadly and that she wasn't going anywhere near there again. It was here the Straw Hats realized that they didn't know how to get back down. Usopp turned to Canis and her father, asking if there was any way back to the Blue Sea. Canis told them that there was, but that meant that they had to go to a place called Cloud End. It was far to the east of here and they had to cross the White Sea. Some of them were looking relieved at that, but naturally Luffy was whining that he didn't want to go yet. Your only other option is to stay here and get sentenced to death, Usopp hissed. What's the problem with that? Zoro asked with a shrug. Nami lost whatever patience she had as she snapped at Luffy that she didn't want him causing Canis and her dad any more trouble, and that even if they left now there was no guarantee that they would make a clean escape. As the crew starts packing up to leave with Nami, Chopper, Robin, and Zoro at the ship, it was decided that Luffy, Sanji, and Usopp would get food and whatever supplies from Pagaya's home. They followed the group up to the house and merely watched as they packed. Sanji was mixing box lunches and Usopp was taking some spare tools and parts that Pagaya said that he no longer needed. Usopp was walking to the window. Canis had walked in at that moment, and Sanji was the first to present her a beautiful box lunch made just for her. But as they were getting ready to leave, Usopp was yelling from the window, screaming that there was something wrong with the ship. Sanji and Luffy jumped to their feet, asking what was wrong as they stood together, staring out at the sea. Usopp just pointed and they could see that the ship was rocking violently back and forth. Sanji had taken a small telescope from Usopp's bag and looked through it, screaming that he could see Nami on deck. When his face suddenly turned blue, some of them had become anxious that something happened. But instead he whispered, "Wait, why in the world is she wearing a t-shirt?" Usopp smacked him, screaming out, "I'm pretty sure we've got more pressing concerns right now." Guys, look, Luffy yelled. The ship started moving. He jumped up so that he was crouching on the sill, but why? They wouldn't just leave us here, would they? The ship was not only moving backwards, but a large and dark shadow appeared beneath them. Whoa, I don't think I've ever seen a ship sailing backwards before. Luffy yelled. But, Usopp gasped, pointing dramatically, but they haven't even set the sails yet. With everyone's attention focused on the ship, most of them didn't notice how Canis sighed miserably behind them. Luffy glanced back at her for a moment before Usopp gasped. It was then that a lobster, at least twice the size of the one that brought them up that milky road, had burst out through the sea and beneath the ship. With the Mary on its back, they were carried off at high speeds. Before the ship was out of their sights, they could hear Nami's familiar voice screaming out at the top of her lungs before they faded away. LLLLUUUFFFFFFFFFFFYYYYYYYY. Help us. Her voice echoed, Sanji. Usopp. And then they were out of their sights. There was stunned silence all around them. No one could think of anything to say before Sanji muttered about the t-shirt again. You're still thinking about that? Usopp screamed before he turned to Luffy and began a rant to try and rescue the others. I wonder, Luffy said thoughtfully, where are they going? Where are they going? Usopp repeated, trying to calm down. Yes, right. I got nothing, Luffy said, and it truly looked bad until Pagaya had a very odd choke in his throat and they looked to him as he jumped. Pagaya informed them that the others were being taken to the sacrificial altar. Say what? Sanji gasped in horror. You don't mean that Nami and Robin and the rest? The rest? Usopp smacked him before Sanji went on, shaking in rage, are gonna be sacrificed to that wannabe god. That creep. He better not touch a hair on my pretty Nami's head. Pagaya then went on, telling them the rest that in heaven's judgment, there were actually two types of criminal punishments. Being taken to the altar and waiting to die by a priest was the first, but the second was a challenge in which the rest of their crew were now hostages in Eneru's hands and they had to go try to rescue them before they died. Hostages. Usopp gasped, getting what Pagaya was trying to say. I'm afraid I must tell you, Pagaya said grimly, that the ones who are to receive the punishment are the three of you standing before me. Wait, what are you trying to say? Sanji asked, but it was clear from his tone that he did understand, though he didn't want to admit it. If we only had a map, Pagaya said, and Usopp quickly turned to the old one that he had in his bag and showed it to them. Pagaya showed them where the altar was, and how to get there. They were to head to the upper yard where the priests were waiting for them. There were 4 of them in all, and they had to get through them to get their friends back. Luffy was smirking, finally, a little action. After a few tense minutes, the 3 of them all had large bags on their back with Kanis was leading them through a crowded street, at least it was crowded before they arrived. The angels on either side shied away from them as if they were all carrying something contagious, their faces held fear and anxiety. Kanis was telling them that this was called Lovely Street, and she started to go into some real details about it. Sanji was especially depressed that the girls were shunning him and was softly groaning about it. As they followed them, some of them noticed out of the corners of their eyes, several of the white berets always following them, as if making sure that they were heading to the right place. Luffy was fascinated by everything he saw, stopping to look at everything until Sanji snapped at them, "Hey Luffy. When you're done fooling around, there's still the matter of rescuing Nami and the others. If you don't get serious, and soon, they're gonna be sacrificed, you know that." But Luffy didn't seem concerned at all. "You worry too much," he said, "they're fine. Don't forget, Zoro's with them." "Yeah, like we can really count on that guy," Sanji said doubtfully. "I just hope the ship hasn't sustained any more damage," Usopp muttered worried. "I mean, she's had more than her fair share of abuse lately." But Luffy suddenly ran right through them, his eyes set on something a little ways ahead. It appeared to have been some kind of statue made up of mud, encased behind glass. Kanis answered for him, "This is Verth. You might say, it represents the eternal yearnings of the people of the sky." Luffy said that it sounded crazy that they worshipped this mud statue. Kanis laughed a little. "Well, I guess it would be difficult for someone from the Blue Sea to understand." She then looked up, realizing where they were. "Oh, we're almost to the docks, right this way." They followed her past all sorts of ships, of different sizes and colors. Of course Luffy wanted the biggest gondola that he could find, but instead she led them to a tiny ship with the figurehead of a crow and a bright umbrella above their heads. Presenting the crow, Kanis said cheerfully, "You're kidding me, right?" Luffy asked her. "Wait, crows don't even swim," Sanji said slowly. They watched as Kanis explained that she used this to get around until she learned to drive the waver. So she had no problems lending it to them now. She then led them a little further ahead, telling them to take gate number 2, that would lead them to the upper yard. That was when they noticed that she seemed to have a lot on her mind. Luffy seemed to have noticed this as he frowned in concern and asked, "Hey, Kanis." "Yes," she asked nervously. "You've been trembling ever since we left," Luffy said, his tone now serious. "Is everything okay?" Her whole body was trembling slightly, and she was suddenly unable to look at them as her eyes widened at Luffy's words. "Is it that noticeable?" she asked. "Yeah," Luffy said, surprisingly soft, "it's like you're scared or something." Sanji at once started to say how sweet it was of her to worry about them. But then Usopp brought up another good question. Speaking of being worried, he said, "Are you and Pagaya gonna be alright? I mean, everyone in town is avoiding us like the plague, but you're leading us around, lending us your boat, giving us directions, is helping us gonna get you in trouble. Doesn't that make you like our accomplices?" Luffy noticed how pale she had become. "Kanis," he said gently, "don't cry. You're gonna be fine, okay? You should have told us you were scared. Really, we could have just come here on our own." "No," she said, unable to look at them. It's not." Sweat was falling from her face and she was shaking worse than ever. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Don't you get it? Even after I told you how terrifying Upper Yard is, I still lead you here. I even got you a boat and told you which route to take. Don't you find that odd? Is it obvious what's going on here?" Out of sight, McKinley started yelling at Kanis not to say anything foolish, before hit as the Straw Hats looked around for the source of his voice. The others in town slowly began to back even farther away, as if there was a bomb about to go off. Suddenly she fell to her knees. "Just run away, please," she begged. She started crying as she apologized over and over again. The citizens were all freaking out at her tears, yelling at her, demanding to know what she was doing. Kanis was already confessing everything. She revealed to them that she was the one who called the Skyfish to take the Mary and the crew away. "You mean that thing that took Nami and the others away?" Sanji yelled out. "You called it Kanis." Kanis continued to cry, telling them that while they were inside talking to her dad, she went aboard and lied to the others about a current that leads to Cloud End. And she had them raised anchor, which was the signal for that lobster, and took them away. Canis finally cried out the reason that she did it. Once we know someone's a criminal, we must lead them to upper yard. If we don't, then the penalty is death. The boys' faces were frozen, darkened as she sobbed openly. It's our duty, she croaked out, it's the duty of every citizen. That's crazy. Usopp gasped out. I know, Canis confessed, tears falling fast. I'm sorry, I should have told you sooner. Wait a second, Luffy said, his voice full of anger, and now he was trembling like Canis had been, only out of fury. You're saying, that they forced you to lead us all here? Too choked up to speak, she merely nodded. The three of their faces still dark, Luffy started, if that's true, and suddenly all three of them were yelling, then why even tell us at all? Canis, stunned by their words, stopped crying and stared up at them, clearly not understanding. Are you nuts? Luffy asked, grabbing her shoulder, now your life's in danger. Suddenly all the townspeople were all running now, looking just as terrified as they cried out that the judgment was coming. Just then the skies above them opened up and there was a bright light above them. They looked up and there was a pillar of light flying down towards them. Luffy saw it coming and his face turned deadly white as he grabbed hold of Canis as they ran for it. But it was too big, they would never hope to avoid it even when Luffy switched out for cheetah legs. The force of the impact was so great that it seemed to shake the whole island, blinding them all as they covered their faces from the brilliance of them all. But as soon as it had come, it disappeared. Shaking at the display of power they just saw, the citizens all stood there, staring at the damage that had been caused. There was so much smoke that they couldn't see anything in front of them for a moment. Sanji and Usopp were both alive and untouched, but they were screaming in horror, calling for Luffy and Canis where there was an enormous crater there. For a horrible second, they truly thought the worst for Luffy and Canis until they heard another voice from above them call, do not fear. They are both safe. They looked up and there was Gonfall, on the back of Pierre, with the two safely on his back. The citizens around were staring at him as Usopp said, the weird old man. Me, weird? Gonfall asked humorously, no, I am the Sky Knight friend. And this one's on the house. He tossed Luffy down to them, but promised that he would keep Canis safe with him, that he gave them his word. Luffy stood up and gave him his thanks, and after he helped them like this, they truly believed that she would be safe for now. But as Gonfall looked down at them, his expression was unusually stony as he asked them, now that you have seen the scope of Eneru's power and anger, what are you going to do next? The same thing we were going to do from the start, Luffy called, go to Upper Yard and rescue our friends. Gonfall was looking at him with new respect as he said, I see, may luck be with you. And with that, he took Canis and they headed off across the city. The three waited until they watched them fly off into the distance before they headed back over to the crow and threw their bags into it. Usopp was already starting to give them words of farewell before Sanji pulled him into the boat and he looked ready to cry. Luffy got behind the wheel and said eagerly as he started it up, alright, Upper Yard here we come. The citizens behind them were all gaping at the three of them in amazement, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing, as they pushed off and headed off towards the gate and down the milky road, towards their friends, and the closer to danger. I really hope Canis is alright, Usopp said worriedly, looking behind them at the ever-shrinking Angel Island. You know she's going to catch grief when the White Berets catch up with her, and it's our own stupid fault. She'd be okay if she hadn't helped us. And I'm not sure we can trust that Sky Knight. He pretty much gives me the creeps. He's kinda old and weird, but he doesn't seem like that bad of a guy, Luffy said. There was no other choice, Sanji said regretfully, I wanna protect her but it's not like we could have brought her along with us. Well, then she probably is in less danger without us, Usopp admitted, not able to think of anything to disagree with that. Usopp then counted off, sacrificial altars, ordeals, from the sound of it I wish I was the one flying off with the old geezer. The boat continued down a little slope and they could just make out the upper yard. As they drew nearer, some of them gasped when they saw it. Hey guys, Usopp cried out in shock, where did that huge forest come from? Is that the upper yard? Sanji yelled as Usopp went to the map, trying to make sense of this. Though the upper yard reminded them a great deal of the middle forest in Goa, only the trees were easily at least twice as big. Onwards they went, Luffy admiring the foliage, and talking about how much he wanted to climb them. A little further ahead, they spotted the statues up ahead, similar to the one they saw on Lovely Street, only these seemed to be much older and made of solid stone rather than mud. There were also several torches that marked the entry. Look, the entrance, Luffy yelled excitedly. Well, this is it, Usopp, Sanji said, if you're gonna chicken out, now's the time. Actually, if you don't mind, Usopp said, I was kinda thinking I'd like to go back. Luffy laughed to Usopp, too late. Then why did you ask me? He screamed at the two as they laughed at how freaked out he was. They soon passed the statues, Usopp's face was contorted with fear as they sailed on, the faces looking like they were leering at them the whole way. As they went further on they saw the remains of ships scattered on either side of them, each of them run aground and sliced right in half as if a giant knife had cut them. Just then they heard the sounds of a large bird somewhere in the distance that startled Usopp so much that he shrieked. Would you calm down? Luffy asked him, turning the wheel a little to avoid a broken mast sticking up through the clouds. Yeah, take it easy, Sanji agreed. Usopp was yelling at the other two to notice the ship reeks and that they all looked like they had been sliced up. They heard a slight rustle through the trees and Usopp began twitching at that, asking if they heard it. The woods are full of noises. Just relax, Luffy told him calmly. I heard that, Sanji yelled. That was finally too much for Usopp. He started screaming and broke out the two paddles that were attached to the ship and tried to go faster. It was a good thing because, out of nowhere, there was a large scythe came flying from behind the trees, its blade large and sharp. Though the three in the boat were able to miss it by the skin of their teeth, it turned out that wasn't the only one. Dozens of them started to appear and Luffy screamed out orders to start paddling like crazy, which the other two had no complaints to following. It was all they could do to keep avoiding being sliced in half. It was a good thing that they didn't take the gondola that Luffy had wanted before, because the crow was small and nimble enough to avoid the blades, though they were still narrow misses each time. Usopp was yelling out confusing orders, and Luffy finally yelled at him to take the wheel as he turned to the back and launched them into the air, sending them flying right past the scythes. With Usopp at the wheel, the other two began to paddle like mad, going much faster than before. But then large wooden spears came flying at them from above. The three in the boat did everything they could to keep the crow from being hit. In the end, Luffy was able to use the senses his chimera form gave him to hit them and bat them away until they were safely out of the way. They were breathing hard, glad to have escaped that obstacle. But their bad luck didn't end there. They looked on to see something was glinting ahead of them through the trees. They found out what it was when as a large spinning buzzsaw came flying right towards them. The buzzsaw narrowly avoided them. It's God, Luffy cried as it flew past them. Not yet, Sanji yelled, now breathing hard as Usopp screamed that it was coming right back at them and they were now struggling to stay afloat. The blade spun in the air and like it was being drawn to them like a magnetic, it hurtled back towards them. Again and again the buzzsaw kept flying at them, trying to cut them to pieces. Usopp was freaking out, wanting to go back, but there was no point right now, there was no guarantee that they would survive it. Luckily they ended up outrunning it when it slammed into one of the trees cutting it in half. I think we finally outran it, Usopp sighed in relief before he looked behind them and groaned out miserably, oh, but this is bad, now it's too late to go back. I can't even see the entrance anymore. Then stay here, Luffy offered. I'd die you idiot, Usopp screamed back at him. Sanji agreed with what Usopp stated and pointed as a giant snake-like creature with row after row of razor-sharp teeth burst through the milky road and attacked. But Sanji was more than ready for it. He jumped up and with a single kick, it was sent flying from them. As he looked back at it anxiously, Luffy commented on that this was the neatest forest he'd ever been in. Neat forest my butt, Usopp snapped, if this is our so-called ordeal, then I quit. You can't quit yet, we just got here. Luffy laughed. Sanji muttered anxiously, we've got to keep moving. We can't spend more time than necessary on this milky road, otherwise we're asking for certain death. They began to talk about how they were sure that the priests were all waiting for them on the island. Usopp realized what Luffy was saying and cried out in horror, so you're telling me that nothing that we've gone through doesn't have anything to do with our actual ordeal? I don't know, I kinda doubt it, Sanji said, especially considering the magnitude of that attack back at the docks. I couldn't tell you how it all works, but it's serious power, take even one hit and you're a goner. This Eneru shouldn't be taken lightly, and I have the feeling that he's watching us even now. Luffy then asked Sanji in surprise if he thought that this Eneru was hiding somewhere in the trees, to which Sanji agreed, stating that he had to have been close by to have been able to attack as accurately as he did. But Usopp then pointed out that didn't have to be the case, if this really was a god, he could probably be watching them right now. Sanji rolled his eyes at Usopp's words as he asked, yeah. And since when did you become such a devoted follower? You're not even from around here. You're missing the point completely, Usopp hissed back at him, everyone says that God is great, right? I was taught to respect those with power. You don't have to mean it, it's self-preservation. Sanji shrugged in a bored way, letting him believe what he wanted, but also reminding him that not everything considered a god is good. But he added that they could talk more about it later when another lamprey appeared, its rows of teeth baring at them. Usopp screamed as Luffy took care of it, punching it so hard with a gorilla's fist that it was slammed into a tree branch from above and it fell back behind them with a splash. I hate Sky Islands, Usopp whispered, they're scary. Wanna get out here? Sanji asked almost teasingly. What kind of question is that? Usopp screamed, actually standing up and spinning around to glare at him, you want me to die? I'm allowed to be scared. Cut me some slack. Luffy pointing ahead of them, yelling that a giant head was blocking their way. They all looked ahead to see the giant stone face, with its hand held up to its mouth as if keeping a secret. Sanji told Luffy that it was just a sculpture, to which Luffy responded that either way it was still a dead end. No, look, Usopp yelled, there are 4 entrances. And he was right, the river branching off into 4 paths going through each finger, each labeled with a different ordeal. Ordeal of swamp, ordeal of iron, ordeal of string, and ordeal of spheres. Usopp looked back to them, asking which one they should take, with Luffy pointing to the last one, saying that spheres sounded like fun. That's your only reason, Usopp yelled. They're ordeals. They're not supposed to be fun. He then looked back to their choices and added, not that I'm disagreeing with you, Spheres is definitely the one that doesn't sound too violent. He then started to imagine what the other ordeals would be like, with each one worse than the other, and in the end, his active imagination got the better of him and he didn't know which one to take. We don't have time for a debate here, Sanji stated in annoyance. They had to make a choice now. We're right on top of it. Alright, Spheres it is, Luffy decided. Looking like he was doing this against his better judgment, Usopp turned the wheel hard and they headed to the doorway in the Pinky, shutting his eyes as he did so, as if hoping that he could somehow protect himself from whatever was coming. When they entered the long tunnel and found that they were in the pitch darkness, they couldn't see anything in front of them. Sanji then poked fun at Usopp, asking him not to shut his eyes since he was the one driving. Not that this made any difference, it was just as dark either way. Luffy suddenly had a very interesting idea and they heard his voice call out, "Hey guys, what if this is like one of those games?" Usopp asked what he was talking about. You know, if you pick the right door then you get a prize. Luffy asked, but if you pick the wrong one? What are you talking about? What if we picked wrong? Why couldn't you mention this before, Luffy? Usopp yelled at him. Well, let's see here, Luffy's voice said, sounding thoughtful as he thought it all over. If you pick the wrong one, then you fall off the island. Usopp lost it. How can you say something so stupid? He screamed out. We're thousands of meters in the air. I don't know how many times your life can flash before your eyes during a fall like that, and I don't want to know. Light suddenly appeared in front of them and they spotted the exit. You both are being idiots, Sanji said as they headed through, nothing like that is gonna. But then as they went out, they went right over the edge of a cliff. The crow hung in the air almost comically for several seconds before they fell, looking down to see nothing but clouds below them. The three in the boat screamed wildly as they did so, with Usopp screaming at the top of his lungs, "You've got to be kidding me." But when they went through one cloud and, to everyone's relief, they landed on another milky road that had been directly beneath them, but they hadn't been able to see it with all the clouds. Sanji was asking, as if making sure that they weren't dead, were alive. Usopp was twitched horribly. I seriously thought we were falling all the way back to the blue sea. Sanji was now kicking Luffy hard in the head. That's because someone had to make up a lame story to scare us. I was scared. Luffy laughed. I thought I was a goner too. Idiot, Sanji hissed to himself. Once he finished laughing and everything calmed down, Sanji pulled the traumatized Usopp from his seat at the crow and took over at the controls this time. Here, they looked around cautiously, trying to get their bearings right. They were still in a large forest, not unlike the road they took to get here, but the milky roads were all crossing and overlapping with each other, even sometimes going up high in the trees and under branches. But what was really different was that this forest was filled with hundreds of large white balls. They seemed to have been made of island cloud, and they were simply floating, not moving, but hanging in the air, drifting around innocently. The three in the crow sailed around for some time, just looking around at all the balls that resembled giant flakes of snow, their eyes peeled for anything out of the ordinary. After a while though, Luffy and Usopp dropped their guards and began poking their heads into the bags for a snack. Only Sanji remained fully aware, looking around watchfully as if expecting someone to jump out and attack at any moment. Soon their captain and sniper had gotten bored, and the two of them were playing with one of the balls, passing it back and forth like a beach ball. Sanji looked back to them and began to tell them off before a snake burst out and went for Usopp, baring its fangs. A snake! Sanji screamed out in shock as Luffy kicked at it, sending it flying away. But then Usopp pointed out another, snake ball, in front of them, and when Sanji tried to kick it, this time, it ended up exploding, burning them all. For crying out loud, what's with these things? Usopp screamed out in fear before he broke down crying. It was obvious to them all that he had finally reached his breaking point. They then heard someone laughing. Oh, silly children, these are surprise clouds. You never know what's going to come out of them. Luffy and the other boys were all looking around, trying to figure out where the voice was coming from when they heard that childish laugh once again. Hesso. They all looked back and they saw him. A man, who hardly looked any different from the round cloud that he was floating on, with long, dark red hair and little wings, dressed in a white jumpsuit with a vertical line of golden rings that ran from front to back, and bright yellow sunglasses as he gave them all a stupid grin. I'm so glad you picked my challenge, the ordeal of spheres. He said, bursting out laughing. The straw hats all had sweat drop falling as they looked at this guy. Yeah, is that a talking dumpling? Sanji asked. The talking dumpling suddenly got up and began dancing and spinning around happily on the cloud as they all stared at him. That's the ordeal. Luffy yelled out, now sounding furiously disappointed, ball guy. Stop with the dancing, and tell us who you are. Sanji yelled. The dumpling didn't answer at first, still doing his dance as Usopp and Luffy whispered to each other, not really seeing him as much of a threat. Sanji lost his temper and yelled up, hey, dumpling, Nami and the others better be safe. The sacrifices, he asked happily as he continued to dance and spin around. They'll escape, or they won't, doesn't really matter which. If they escape they'll die. If they're sacrificed, well they'll die then too. What's that mean? Sanji demanded, sounding angry. But I would be more worried about yourselves. The dumpling went on, you'll have to beat me if you plan on going any further. And I really don't see that happening. He laughed that annoying laugh once more as he jumped, heading right for them. Luffy was in front, looking ready to throw a punch. Ooh, the dumpling said interested, you're gonna change into an animal. Luffy looked startled that the dumpling had said that, but went for the punch anyway while going into his chimera form as he did. The dumpling danced out of the way, missing it completely before he held his hand up to Luffy's lion-like face, and with some kind of shockwave from his hand, Luffy was sent flying. His hat was blown off like a kite before he was slammed right into the tree, crashing into it, and for a moment his vision faded before it came back and found he was on his face, leaving a deep crater in the tree behind him. A trail of blood was dripping from his mouth as Usopp and Sanji yelled at him, trying to know if he was alright. Luffy. Usopp called in terror, you're okay aren't you? A hit like that couldn't have hurt you that much. The dumpling laughed as he held up his slightly smoking hand, well, you see, it's not what you call a normal hit. Enraged, Sanji charged at him, but once again the dumpling was able to dodge it by merely stepping to the side, almost twirling around. Only the most well-trained are granted the power of mantra. Sanji was staring at the dumpling in shock, unable to believe that he was able to predict his attack, before the fat freak held up his hand and sent him crashing to the ground as well. Usopp screamed out Sanji's name, not noticing the dumpling right behind him before he was also sent flying down to join them. All three of them were bleeding and hurt, but they didn't seem to be too badly hurt because they were already starting to get back up. Luffy looked to the others, and Sanji confirmed that they were alright as he reached for his hat. Sanji was then demanding to know what that roly-poly did. I've got no idea, Luffy confessed, wiping some of the blood from his mouth. Who is this guy anyway? Resuming his dance on the crow, the dumpling answered, my name is Satori. I am one of the 4 priests of the Almighty Eneru who watch over the upper yard and see to it the judgment of criminals such as yourselves. I own the Verth in this lost forest. The lost forest, Luffy repeated, sounding just as lost. Why yes, Satori smiled evilly, my forest and all its glory. Ho, ho hoo. Satori stepped on the accelerator and caused the crow to start moving once again. He went on speaking, telling them that the boat will continue going along without them until it reached the exit. If they were unable to find the boat before then, they would lose their only way to the sacrificial altar and be lost in this forest forever. That was what this trial was, to try and find the boat once again while avoiding him and his surprise clouds, which could be holding anything. The ordeal of spheres. Satori yelled joyfully, there's a 10% survival rate. So good luck. He laughed a little more, you boys better catch up to her real soon. She's getting away. Luffy offered to stay behind and deal with Satori while Sanji and Usopp went looking for the boat. Sanji hesitated for only a moment before he nodded in understanding, but before he left, he warned him to be careful. Luffy jumped up and began swinging around fighting with Satori, however with his mantra it was impossible for Luffy to be able to make a move without him already knowing it. In the end, the fight ended quickly and Luffy's head was slammed right through a thick tree, his goat horns sticking into the wood. Luffy tried desperately to pull his head out of the tree trunk as Satori continued to laugh. Aren't you stubborn? He asked sweetly before he went floating away on his sphere, clearly going after the others. After several tense minutes, Luffy was able to pull his head back out. Luckily, after using his bat-like wings to glide through the forest, Luffy found that he hadn't gone far. He spotted the priest tormenting the other boys and Luffy went running along the tree branches to reach him, sending a punch with the force of a speeding train right at him. Luffy stop. Sanji screamed, use your head. You're only making things worse. Luffy realized this as well, but it was too late. As Satori nimbly dodged out of the way of the attack, the punch made a large shockwave which had caused all the surprise clouds around them to start flying every which way. They would then hit other surprise clouds and then they would go flying in all directions as well so that it was like a snowstorm. They were soon forced to run around, avoiding them at all costs. A variety of things emerged from them. Things like spears, giant crabs, fire. Usopp even had 4 giant singing birds appear out of some and start punching him like a boxing match. Luffy, through a series of acrobatics while trying to avoid drowning and being eaten by sky fish, was forced to go into his monkey form and start swinging around on vines. His fear turned to laughter as he let out a loud jungle call. Will you get serious? Sanji roared at him. After seeing Luffy swinging around on vines, Usopp got an idea and went to his newest invention that he called the Usopp Awe. A special belt that he made that could fire a grappling hook for him to swing from tree to tree with. He was able to hook onto a tree and went swinging over to the crow. Everyone thought for sure he was going to make it. Even Satori was looking surprised by this, at least until they found out that Usopp forgot to put in a way to detach the rope and missed the boat. Finally losing his temper, Sanji got them both down in front of him and beat them both black and blue. Here's the deal, the cook said once he had cooled off and took several deep breaths on his cigarette. I'm gonna forget what just happened, now you do what I say. Both boys nodded, having no problems with that, and clearly not wanting to get beaten up again. Okay then, he said as he went on, first thing we forget about the boat for now. Then we're all gonna charge that fat freak at once. I don't care what kind of powers he's got, Sanji continued, with all three of us attack at the same time, if there's a way to beat him we'll find it. Oh, Satori's voice called from somewhere above them, obviously having heard everything they said, don't be so sure. They all jumped up, staring around to try and find him. When Sanji turned his back to keep looking, Satori fell from the branches above and jumped behind him, hitting him with another impact and sending him crashing to the ground. Luffy and Usopp both tried to fight, but soon they joined Sanji as well. All three of them were lying bruised, bloody, and burned on the ground as Satori continued to jump around happily on the surprise clouds. By this point, Luffy was struggling to push himself back up as Satori laughed again. You're still alive, I'm impressed. And, as a reward for good behavior, we're gonna finish off our fun today with a move I've received several awards for. Ho, ho hoo. He then pulled out a stripped cane like a giant candy cane, my super secret surprise, Sphere Dragon. And then, Satori connects several surprise balls together with a dragon head on top so that it looked like some strange kind of caterpillar. Introducing the Sphere Dragon, he called happily. But Luffy looked far from impressed as he got back to his feet. Now panting hard, he yelled up, it looks like all you did was string a bunch of surprise clouds together. Is that the best you can do? I have to say I'm disappointed. Oh, you won't be for long. Satori promised, you see my friend, the dragon is loaded with explosive surprises and all sorts of delightful shrapnel. Usopp paled before he squeaked out, but, that means, if you even touch the fireball sphere somewhere on its body it'll be over for you and your friends. Satori said happily, you'll be blown to bits in the incinerating inferno. Hope you like fireworks. He then held the cane high and the dragon went straight for them. Luffy clearly didn't care if the dragon exploded or not, he was going to attack anyway but just as the dragon went straight for him, Usopp charged in, tackling him out of the way just in time. You idiot, he yelled, holding Luffy down to keep him from attacking the dragon again, that freak just told us if we touched that thing it'll explode. Do you want to die a fiery death? Luffy practically threw Usopp off him, demanding, well how are we gonna fight it if we can't touch it? That's just it. Usopp yelled at him in frustration, we can't fight it. I think now is the time to run. Satori sent the dragon after them again, and they were forced to run. What do we do? Luffy yelled, jumping around wildly, the dragon head quickly catching up. I don't know, you're the captain. Usopp yelled before he had an idea. On 3, we jump. 3. The two did jump out of the way, missing the dragon completely, but they ended up landing onto another surprise cloud. They didn't realize it at once but once the dragon missed them they turned blue in the face before it exploded once again. Ho, ho hoo. Well, you are quite the little survivors aren't you? Satori asked, still as gleeful as he had been before, and they were all growing sick of listening to this guy. The two rolled over, with Usopp yelling at him that he was just toying with them. Correct. It wouldn't be as much fun if you didn't experience the full power of the Sphere Dragon. Satori asked, as if they were two naughty boys who were being punished for doing something stupid. Shall we continue? There's no way you can win. He bragged, after all, I'm a priest. And you all look so tired. Why don't you just end this now and die? My heart can't take any more of this, Usopp gasped, now looking like he was fighting to breathe. Too many surprises, how, it hurts. You'll be out of options quite soon, Satori said, looking back up, it's sad really, your little boat has almost reached the exit. And when that happens, it's all over for you. Ho, ho hoo, you'll have nowhere to go unless you all suddenly learn to fly. Satori went on just as Luffy was sitting up, you'll wander around their terribly confusing forest until you die of exhaustion. Luffy was up again, trying to attack by becoming a rhino hybrid and attempted to gouge the man with his horn, but he might as well have just told Satori what he was going to do. He dodged it and had the dragon going after him once again. As Luffy ran, he noticed Usopp slipping off into the forest. As Luffy continued to run, he finally caught a break when he ran up a tree, and almost ended up falling back on the dragon. But something caught him before he did and he discovered the wire that was connected to Satori's cane, and what caused him to control the dragon like a puppet. It only took him a few seconds to realize what it was and then he snapped the wire in half. Seeing the wire break, Satori gasped in horror. You ruined my Sphere Dragon you impudent little brat. He yelled, and for the first time he sounded angry. Now you die. Get over here this instant. But as he pulled the cane, he pulled Luffy with him, who hadn't let go of the other half the rope and was pulling the dragon with him. Satori realized too late what was happening. Let go of the dragon, fool. He screamed, but Luffy was still hurtling towards him, still pulling the dragon behind him, perhaps having instincts holding onto the other rope. Satori screamed out just as they crashed into him and the explosion after that was enormous. A giant fireball went up around them, burning the trees as shrapnel went flying in all directions. There was a giant black crater in the ground, blowing parts of trees away, the ground completely burnt to a crisp. It was smoking and filled with things like swords, arrows, spears. Satori was there on another surprise cloud as he gasped for breath and severely burned. That was close, Satori wheezed, that maniac must have had a death wish. This isn't good. He looked at the damage and added to himself, I've got to intensify my training. I can't let a weakling like him get the upper hand in a fight. Not even for a second. That might block me from using my mantra. You're right, Luffy's voice said, and Satori was looking around anxiously. That was close. Luffy was clinging to Satori's back, also burnt and injured but not nearly as bad thanks to his thick rhino hide. It's you. How are you still alive? Satori said, finally noticing where he was, and seemed stunned that he hadn't noticed it before. Then suddenly Satori was trying to throw Luffy off desperately, trying to get rid of him and screaming out, get off me. You horrible little man, I'll get you for this. Let go of me right now. I said let go. Do not let him go, Luffy. Called a familiar voice, and Sanji was sitting on top of a dud of a surprise cloud that had a flower sticking out of it. Satori looked up in horror. You too? Hey Sanji, Luffy said, pushing Satori's head down so that he could see him. Where have you been? I was out cold on the forest floor. He screamed, where else would I have been, you idiot? Sanji calmed down almost at once as he said, but that's beside the point. He lit a cigarette and turned his attention back to Satori. The point is you keep saying challenge this, and challenge that, which normally wouldn't interest me. However, there are two helpless ladies who are waiting for me to come to their rescue, and I refuse to let them down. So I'm proposing this, and I think you'll like it, past Sanji said as he looked up, his face dark as finished, ordeal, of love. Satori freaked out and tried to escape, but Luffy quickly transformed himself back into his human form before becoming a large anaconda and wrapping his body around the man to keep him from moving anywhere. Satori realized that he was trapped and began to scream out that they had no honor, gaining up 2 against 1. We have no honor, Sanji repeated in disgust. You creeps kidnapped our friends and tried to murder a beautiful young angel. And you accuse us of not having any honor. Luffy smirked as he added to Satori, I've been thinking, it's pretty amazing you're able to predict our movements. But what good is that, when you can't do anything to avoid them? Satori turned blue in the face and began to thrash around more desperately than ever. He screamed out that they release him at once. That he was a priest and not being judged by him was a first-degree crime in Skypiea, that attacking him meant declaring war on Eneru. Sanji and Luffy couldn't have cared less what Satori said anymore. Sanji then leapt high into the air and starts flipping over rapidly to gain speed. When he fell down, he brought the heel of his foot down on Satori's head, shattering his glasses and causing a few teeth to pop out of his head as he screamed, and that was the end of the fight. After meeting up with Usopp, they were continuing on once they found the boat. They had left the forest and had entered a rich grassy field. Only there was something wrong here. There were skulls set up on stakes, scattered everywhere. What is this? Luffy gasped, shielding his eyes from the sun as he looked ahead. My money is, this is where we're supposed to find the ordeal, which means another priest, Sanji said, so you two stay awake. Oh no, Usopp moaned out, I think one ordeal is enough of a nightmare today. Which one seems like it can be out here? String, iron, swamp, I'm so nervous. Relax, it's just a grassy field. Luffy told him, open your eyes. Usopp cried out with a strangled scream, it's not just a field. It's a field with 1,000 impaled skulls set up like trophies to scare us. And it's working. Luffy looked over the edge and saw that he was right as they passed the skulls. Yeah, you're right, I wonder who did this. Usopp then began to cry again, gasping out that it had to be another one of those priests behind this and he was going to tear their bodies in half. Another priest with another ordeal. Sounds like fun, Luffy said. Are you out of your mind? Usopp demanded, now sounding hysterical. Those are heads on sticks back there. On sticks. That's gonna be us. Oh, don't worry so much, Usopp, we'll beat him, Luffy said when they suddenly heard a blast a little ways of them. Looking up, several figures came bursting out and flying at them on those strange skates one again. One of them was carrying a large bazooka and noticed them as well when they flew overhead. He then flipped upside down and sent a cannonball at them, which Luffy reflected and redirected. We're ready. Luffy screamed at him angrily, now revved up for some action, come on down. We'll cream you. Make your move, big guy. That remark seemed to tick the man off, even at this distance. He then stood up and shouted back, you sound and stink of Blue Sea people. Which means you're the ones causing all the chaos in Skypiea. Sanji then said quickly to Luffy that he was the one who attacked them when they first arrived, which only infuriated Luffy all the more. Now that they could see his face, half of it was also covered with similar tribal marks that his arm had. He was also smoking a cigarillo when he glared down at them with cold eyes. Usopp screamed in fear, cowering in his seat as he cried out to just hurry up and blow them up to get it over with. If you don't want to die, then go back to your Blue Sea immediately. The man yelled, because I promise if you do anything stupid on this island, we'll execute you with Eneru. They were all startled to hear that he wanted to kill this so-called god. Sanji stated that these guys weren't like the Skypians who didn't seem to have the nerve to stand up to him, but Usopp was now begging Luffy that if they weren't Eneru's priest there was no reason to fight them and that they should just sail on. But Luffy was too angry to listen, clearly wanting to go over there to fight him, but Usopp had to jump on him, keeping him down. But then the 4 of them disappeared, no longer interested in staying. Usopp laid back as Luffy stared after them. I wonder why they're up here, he said softly. I'm not sure, Sanji said seriously, must be pretty serious. But they seem to be enemies of Eneru as well as us. You know, Usopp whimpered softly, I really do hate this place. They continued to ride the crow along the milky roads, only now the sun was going down. The sky was a mixture of red and golds, and they knew that it wasn't going to be much longer before the sun set. They took a road that was climbing over the largest tree that any of them had ever seen. Luffy's eyes were wide like a child's as Usopp began muttering that he had a bad feeling that something bad was waiting for them over that treetop, he was sure of it. It turned out to be a right guess when they got to the top, it led to an incredibly unsafe drop. And like they were on a roller coaster, they went into almost a free fall, sliding down at a breakneck speed. Sanji suddenly called over the rush of the wind, do you see them down there? Are those the priests? Usopp cried fearfully. No, just sky sharks, Sanji said and Usopp sighed in relief. Oh thank goodness, I thought for sure that we were goners. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What do you mean sky sharks? Sharks, the size of whales, bright blue with stripes were there at the bottom of their descent, their mouths filled with razor-sharp teeth, and large enough to swallow them whole, were wide open. Usopp started panicking, but Luffy took care of them all by jumping to the crow's head and dived into the water like clouds. Suddenly, they saw a sky octopus like from earlier, except with Luffy's straw hat and scar, and it was using its tentacles to punch each one of them out cold. Once the danger was out of the way, they ended up skidding to a rough stop in what looked like a lake of clouds, and splashed water everywhere. Luffy noticed something up ahead as he gasped and yelled to the other two once they got their bearings, check it out. We found it. There's the altar with the Going Merry sitting right on top. He was right, on the top of a pyramid-shaped structure was the ship, and over on the shore were Nami, Robin, and Zoro, all of them alive and unscathed. Even from this far away, they could see that the ship was a mess. She was burnt in several places and the mast was lying at the foot of the stairs that led up to it. But none of them seemed to have noticed it at first. Luffy and the others were all so glad to see them, to meet familiar faces that weren't trying to kill them, they started to cheer and celebrate. It was a touching scene. They went over to the shore to pick up the three there before they headed to the foot of the stairs and raced up to be greeted by a big hug from Chopper. But Chopper was in just as rough shape as the boat, his fur was scorched, and there still bleeding cuts, he had covered his chest with bandages as he had treated his own injuries. Chopper told them that soon after Zoro, Nami and Robin headed off into the woods, a priest called Shira appeared at the sacrificial altar to take care of the offering. He was burning everything around him with his lance and bird that breathed fire, and managed to destroy parts of the Merry before he finally got bored and tried to kill Chopper. After hugs all around, asking each other if they were alright, with Sanji particularly asking the women, who informed him that they were just fine, Usopp finally noticed what was left of the mast and asked what happened. Chopper tried to apologize, letting him know that he tried everything he could to protect the ship, but that priest kept burning everything. Usopp nodded slowly, telling Chopper not to worry about the ship, that they'll figure it out later and was just glad that he was alright. At his words, Chopper looked ready to cry as he ran to the edge of the ship, climbed up it and began to declare to the rest of the world, I promise to become a more reliable man starting right now. Luffy told him to stop yelling at the altar and asked how he was able to get rid of that priest. Chopper looked back and explained that he used the whistle to call Gonfall. In the nick of time, the Sky Knight appeared and the two fought a battle in the sky. After an even match, Shira used his ordeal to trap Gonfall and pierce him with his lance. Chopper then took them all inside the cabin to where he had been tending to his wounds, promising that though he was badly injured, he had a good chance of recovering if he rested. We owe him 3 times now, Zoro said as Luffy crouched down at Gonfall's bedside and said softly, he was willing to sacrifice this much for us, even though he gave us that whistle for free. If it wasn't for the Sky Knight, you guys probably wouldn't have a ship and I'd for sure be dead, Chopper said softly. I've got a bunch of questions for him, Sanji stated, but his serious tone had respect and gratitude in. But I guess I'll wait until he wakes up, he finished before he glanced to Pierre and added a thanks to him as well. They soon decided to move to land and make camp there for the night, with Usopp explaining to Luffy in annoyance that if they were attacked, their ship would be the first to take a beating and they couldn't risk her suffering any more damage than she had so far. After they took the crow over to shore, they got their camp set up. It was strange how casual everyone was acting after everything that had happened today. Luffy complained about being hungry and hauled one of the sky sharks out of the water so that Sanji could roast it over the fire for him. They set up the tents and Chopper made some medicine for Luffy, Sanji, Usopp and Gonfall, before passing some medicinal herbs to Robin and Sanji, asking them to grind it up for him for the old man. None of them said much as Usopp set up a chalkboard and turned to the others, getting their attention. Quiet down now, he called, it's time to hear everyone's field reports. Sanji, still grinding up the medicine, spoke first. We ran into this priest named Satori who uses spheres with different kinds of threats inside each one. Explosives, dragons, the usual, but what really hung us out to dry in the fight was that this guy kept predicting our moves with a power called mantra or something. The priest who attacked me was named Shira and he used a spear that set fire to anything. Chopper then spoke up. He seemed like he could predict my moves just like that Satori guy, and I tried to attack him, but he trailed off, sounding ashamed. He dodged me every single time. Then the bird he was riding burnt down the mast and the Sky Knight was defeated. Nami patted Chopper's shoulder in a consoling way as he sighed. Sounds like you all had a rough time, Nami said sympathetically. Well, what we found is that this island we're on is actually the missing part of Jaya. You see, the city of gold didn't sink into the ocean, but it was shot into the sky like us. We saw the other half of Cricket's house, which proves this theory. Usopp called victoriously after he finished writing it all down on the board. Excellent work, he cried to them all. Now, based on your reports, we learned that the priests can predict our movements with a power they like to call mantra. And the bird blows flames and the spear burns you. But most importantly, we learned this. He jabbed at the board with a stick at the notes. The city of gold is not 1,000 leagues under the sea like we thought, but is hidden somewhere on this very island. Wow, after all the trouble we went through to get here, who would have imagined that it'd be the city of gold? Nami whispered to herself. Luffy was yelling out in shock at what Usopp said. No way. That was the first thing I told you. Nami yelled at him in frustration. But Zoro and Sanji both began a conversation, sounding civil with each other for once, about what mantra was all about. Sanji offered that perhaps it was some kind of sixth sense that you could only learn up here, which Zoro looked highly doubtful here. But it was clear that there was only one thing on Luffy's mind as he stood up, his eyes shining as he whispered in wonder, this is it. An adventure with gold at the end. I can't wait. Nami was smiling at Luffy, and even gave him a wink as she said, glad to see someone on my side. I'm ready. Luffy, no, Usopp said, turning pale again as the excitement quickly drained out of his face. Did you forget what the scary gorilla guy said about execution? God will be really mad, Chopper said nervously. Robin giggled to herself. Sounds like fun, she said, sounding excited for the chance to look at this ancient city with her own eyes. Well, we wouldn't be very good pirates if we turned our backs on gold, Sanji reasoned with a smirk, so let's not. Won't be easy, Zoro added with an evil grin, you know everyone up here already hates us. Which means I'm in. Come on, Usopp said tearfully, aren't you even a little frightened by the wrath of God? I mean, I wanna live, don't you? But they were all smiling, each one of them had clearly made up their minds about what they were going to do, and Luffy only confirmed it as he stood up tall, laughing his head off as he declared, gold. And it's all waiting for us. Later, all the Straw Hats were gathered around the fire, enjoying some stew from a large cooking pot that Sanji obviously prepared for them all, and Nami had her glasses on as she was speaking to them all. Anyway, let's review Noland's logbook. He discovered the city of gold 400 years ago. However, after leaving the island and returning with his king, he discovered that the gold ruins had vanished. Luckily, we now know what happened to these ruins. Before Nami went on, there was a loud clanging noise. Apparently Sanji had hit Luffy over the head with the pot's lid for something again. Getting ticked off, Nami was telling him off before he retorted something about Luffy's manners. Looking annoyed at the boys, Nami turned back to the others and started to talk about how it had to have been the knock upstream that brought this place to the sky. Do you really think a whole island could have done that? Chopper asked her as he passed several bowls to the others. Well, it's the only thing that makes sense, Nami answered. Remember, Cricket said whenever this phenomenon occurs it's in a different location. Usopp agreed with them all, stating how enormous the explosion was and he wasn't surprised that it lifted up part of an island. Zoro looked up at the trees, muttering that he found it hard to believe that this giant forest was the same one they saw back on Jaya. Robin agreed, but also stated that there must have been something special about the environment here in the clouds that dramatically increased growth rate, just looking at the trees and animals they had seen. Chopper added that it had been a large flock of south birds who saved him in Gon Fall, and they were at least 10 times bigger than the ones they saw on Jaya. At those words, Sanji then asked Chopper why those birds saved them, and the little reindeer confessed that he wasn't sure about that, but he did say that when he woke up and saw them there, they referred to the Sky Knight as God. They stared at him. He's God. Luffy screamed out, food actually falling from his mouth as he pointed wildly over his shoulder at the sleeping knight. So if we beat the crud out of this guy, then our job here is done. Usopp began yelling at Luffy, before Nami brought them back to the matter at hand, asking if any of them remembered what Noland wrote about in his log about the City of Gold. The last thing he wrote in his log before he died is something odd, Robin answered. It's something I still can't figure out, even after seeing this island. It said that the City of Gold was in the skull's right eye. That's it, Nami declared before she went to the 2 maps with her. Nami was pulling out 2 maps and was spreading them out in front of her. I matched up Robin's map of Jaya, along with the old Skypia map that we found in the shipwreck, she said, carefully folding one of the maps and putting them together like a puzzle. As everyone got up and went over to see what she was talking about, she added, of course, this isn't exact and there may be some incorrect overlap, but if you match up the location of Cricket House with the broken one we found up here, this is what Jaya looked like 400 years ago. Neat, Luffy said beaming. It's a skull. It is a skull, Chopper chirped. The Straw Hats had a bright shine in their eyes and they were already starting to celebrate until Usopp asked exactly where in the skull's right eye they were supposed to look. Nami figured that out as well as she pointed to a small monument in the center of the eye. It's the one structure that's actually inside the eye, she explained. And no one's found it yet because of all the people who've tried, we're the ones with both maps. They were all getting excited, some of them looked like they were ready to go off into the forest now for it. But Nami came up with the game plan. Since they couldn't leave the ship unguarded, it was decided that in morning they would break the crew into 2 groups. And hopefully by this time tomorrow they would have more gold than they ever dreamed as well as finally leave this island behind. They then went on to finish their meal and talk excitedly about their plans, each sounding as crazy as the next, but Nami was promising them that they would think of something after they fixed the ship and got her off the altar. It was funny to watch as some of the boys were starting to get into an argument with Nami about having a big bonfire or to put it out. The boys were all for the idea, but Nami was getting angry, reminding them of the danger that they were all in and that the forest didn't need any help in killing them. But as they argued, they had some more unexpected visitors. A large pack of cloud wolves appeared. After a few harsh words exchanged, and Nami ended up clobbering the leader of the pack, they seemed to have developed a grudging respect. And no one was able to see how it happened, but to their amazement, it ended up becoming a party. The Straw Hats and the Cloud Wolves were all dancing, singing and laughing around the fire, the festival of the eve of the gold hunt. It hazy morning and they were standing at the foot of the stair of the altar. Usopp was pointing wildly to the ship, yelling to the others and practically crying, "It's true. I wasn't dreaming. Someone was here last night." They glanced up in time to see that the Mary had been repaired. They climbed the stairs to see that the ship was now full of mismatched patches. But the mast was put back where it was before and the sides were fixed with extra boards. Even the flying gear had also been taken off her so she looked as she always been. "I knew it." Usopp yelled out, "See guys, I told you I wasn't insane." He was then crying as if he was relieved to know that as well just as Nami put her hand on the mast, looking pleased, and unable to believe it. "Hey, now that's service." Sanji said, "I hate to say it. But they did a lousy job." Luffy laughed happily that whoever did sure was nice. Usopp was now pacing the deck, saying that he knew that he saw someone here last night. Zoro began speaking again, asking how he couldn't see how anyone would want to help them. As far as he knew, the only other people up here with them were their enemies, so why would any of them want to risk crossing a river of sky sharks to fix their ship? As Chopper swung happily from rope called to Usopp, asking who he thought he saw, though Usopp couldn't think of an answer to that. But for Nami, the curiosity had worn off and she told them that it didn't matter anymore and that they still had a lot of work to do. As they started to get to work they heard Usopp whisper to the ship, how could he have possibly known? "Come on Mary, just tell me who I saw." Usopp and Chopper headed back down the stairs to the crow to try and figure out a way to get the ship off the altar. Usopp and Chopper were in the crow and now making their way around the altar. In the end, Usopp came up with an idea. Using his Usopp Awe, he was able to hook it around the Mary's bow and tried to pull it off themselves. However, the crow just didn't have enough strength for something like this. But Usopp soon came up with another way. Usopp hung Chopper to a large pole like a fishing line and tried to tempt a sky shark to eat him. Usopp was able to hook the rope onto the shark and used its strength to heave the ship off the altar, down the stairs, and back into the water. After they took the time to untie Chopper, calm him down, and convince him that they were his friends, Nami pulled out the map and came up with the plan. Since Luffy and Robin insisted on going to the City of Gold, and Nami had to stay on the Mary to guide it out of the upper yard and to the meeting place, she came up with the 2 teams. "Okay, let's look at the map," she said, pulling out her pencil and began drawing arrows on it. "The exploration team will be taking this route, moving south," she said, drawing an arrow directly to the right eye. "There should be some old ruins near the skull's right eye. Keep an eye out for enemies and bring back that gold," she told them. "Huh, you make it sound so easy," Zoro said. "I'm looking forward to investigating those old ruins," Robin said smiling widely. "Hold on," Luffy said, looking to Nami, "you're the one who keeps talking about gold and more gold but you're not coming." "Well, of course not," she said, "it's way too scary." Nami seemed to notice the look on Chopper's face and gave him a dark look, asking if he said anything and he shook his head hurriedly as she went back to the map. "We'll be in danger too you know," she added, "we'll be taking the Mary down river through the island. Then, we head for the beach near the ruins as fast as possible." She drew the arrows so that even a child could understand them. "We'll meet up here," she finished, pointing to a spot near the right eye, "and then we can escape this stupid sky island." She sighed happily as she thought about it, muttering dreamily, "At long last we'll be a rich and powerful pirate crew. Able to buy anything." The groups were divided with Luffy, Zoro, Chopper, and Robin in the group going to get the gold, while Nami, Usopp and Sanji were to stay on the Mary with Gonfall and Pierre and hopefully meet up with them. "Okay," Zoro said agreeably as they all picked up their bags after Sanji packed them all box lunches, "we'll all meet safely on the east coast." The Mary stopped by the south shore, where the 4 of them jumped to land. They hung around long enough to wave the Mary off before they turned and went their separate ways for the day.